It's live.
Yeah,
We're live. We're good.
I'm
We're
sending
good.
it out.
Thank you for asking me though. Wow, I appreciate that.
I'm low-key disappointed that we didn't get to go neg. I was kind of excited for this debate.
I was not.
Well, you know, Jacob wasn't really excited when he found out here. Yeah.
Okay, stream is live.
He just doesn't want everything to work. Cool. People got everything?
Yeah, no.
Hey, y'all good?
I did.
Cool. Everybody else good?
That's what I said.
Cool. From the dumping of nuclear waste in Yucca Mountain to the nuclear testing on Western Shoshone people to uranium mining on Navajo land in Somalia to the placement of nuclear energy centers in black community cellar society has never simply enacted a first-use nuclear strike on black and indigenous communities, but always the 100th, the 1,000th, the endless strike. The world is already a post-nuclear apocalypse for black and indigenous peoples. Cato 93. The administration of capital state by construction of nation creates visual organization by capital on separate the perception of all means of destruction built being historically contextualized. The only instance of real nuclear last year, the explosion of Hiroshima and outside the nuclear capacity is confined to the realm of fantasy. Nuclear war has been taking place on this earth in the name of nuclear testing. The primary targets of warfare have been for the indigenous peoples to expand the notion of nuclear warfare, including kind of violence, improving nuclear full cycle. We must add that not stopping other indigenous nations list targets. Nuclear war has been waged against indigenous nations. Nuclear catastrophe has never been the unthinkable single catastrophe, but the real catastrophe of repetitive ongoing nuclear explosion and exposure to radioactivity. Ongoing nuclear wars has been subordinated to imaginary catastrophe by running the mere preludes to the apocalypse. This, the infinitude of nuclear violence against black and indigenous peoples reveals this year's resolution to be nothing more than a symptom of white liberal anxiety about Trumpism. As such, it posits reclaiming liberal trajectory towards a democratic transcendental social contract that checks and balances that obscures the atemporal nature of settler colonialism, anti-blackness, and disavows that the first use was the theft of Native and black being and the modalities of genocide and slavery rose up in 17. The characterization in terms of legend of deception, conflict of the U.S. president racism, colonial history, the power to disavows U.S. settler colonialism, sciences, producing global coloniality. The fact that the era of Trump has had a brand new challenge deeply reflects the problem. Liberal performances of vulnerability suffering in the aftermath of the election include the discursive claim that Trump poses a threat to fundamental U.S. democratic institutions, as well as the calls to secure those institutions' integrity after the election. Supposed judiciary and legislature will provide the checks and balances. If you ignores the fact that government structures were put in place not to ensure a progressive government, but to secure the power of slaveholding states and serve uphold state-level sovereignty. The framing of Trump as an intrepid liberal democracy presents the moment as one of recuperation rescue rather than reimagination. Discursive investment in securing the nation's fundamental democratic institutions involves erasing their role in constituting violence in the colonial history of the United States' ongoing manifestations. Instead of focusing on defending the traditions of U.S. monarchy, we should ask what alternative political and economic orders are possible and indeed necessary. What about relations and communities have long been imagining active alternatives? How might we take our cue from and reimagine on alternatives to the nation state? Thus, Turtle Island should restrict the executive power of the President of the United States to conduct first-use nuclear strikes everywhere land resists and refuses. Whales that destroy ships, bees that refuse to work, bombed islands that reconstitute themselves. The land is also resistant in the form of people. Indigenous and black people's resistance is the land's resistance. Indigenous and black people continue to prefer legal and capitalist technology. The part of that resistance and technologies and technological beings resist too. Land is not the background on which nuclear colonialism takes place, but instead the constituent point of relationality that nuclear colonialism attempts to contaminate and erase. You should prefer a form of hyper-subjectivity that centers land as an agent of force that is resists and restricts colonial logics. Voting affirmative is an intervention in the production of colonial alienation from land interests. 18. Nuclear colonialism conceptualized in terms of the human scene, the more the human as possible agents, victims, resistors, contributors, shifts attention to the made away. Nuclear colonialism is a better way produced by entails integrated reproduction, the more the human land community of animals, plants, souls, water. Expanding nuclear colonialism with the human war, the human family calls attention to how most nuclear bomb placed in the reveals a web of material discursive ecological relations with enemies of spiritual college organize the possibility of interdimensional relations between human beings and other beings, kinship with the land, so climate, soil, water, fountains, lakes, forest, streams, human plants, animals. The notion of kinship with the land was the possibility of thinking of land as community, thinking ecologically about nuclear colonialism always exclusively focused on either human or more than human, and they avoid the binary between two is possible to recognize the cellular colonialism system that links but does not equate oppressions experienced by indigenous people more than human land community. Cellular colonialism management people land for and fund in the service of colonial power. This theorization is what Kozak calls a politics of grounded normativity, a relation for and with the land that understands land beyond the grammar of territorial sovereignty via political gains, but instead an imminent political project, a generative point of resistance. Reading indigenous critical theory along with black radical philosophy disarticulates racial capitalism's project of property, which is eminently constituted by the dual project of by fungibility, so the colonial clearing bird at all 18. Grounded relationality is being grounded in the liberation on which the human non-human war of the material of land and all elements of each significance of ways that exceed liberal conception of the human. What happens when land is understood not as property shared but a source of relation with an agency of its own? How might reconceiving of land's relationship, the grounded relationality and benefits away from territoriality state? How might building capacity for relationality and psychological appropriation make it possible to handle anticipated ends of justice? Is there a way for land self-service and ontological condition for a different concept of political that refuses conflict doctrine discovering appropriations appropriate self? Black radical philosophy alongside indigenous critical theory might help us rethink alternatives that are both straightforward, realizable in fact already manifest in certain emotion, celebrates the suffering they were for the acting guerrilla collateral agency, disownership, renewal experiment, news, the intersection of squatting the position was very erratic, the union not vanishing quite fast, not by local control of the gift of private property. Tiffany King argues for an infirmary for which to consider how blackness mediates the way the natural world can be imagined, a noble landscape in flux, such a framework, disrupts the spatial body, hinges at the times of indigenous, local communities, black studies, blackness, becomes an feature of the spatial imagination, such as obviously center bodies inside of pure labor within property, love, still, colonialism, emerged capitalism, to be more fluid about the portions of those same bodies that move, made to move and remove, build and destroy, related to our son of this transformation, praxis of ground activity, revolution of the land itself, generates the process, practice, and knowledge that inform our political system, which will act in solidarity, and will live in the amounts of form of auto, genocide, ground normativity, present the way of knowing and being in this placement, extends memory to a vast kinship networks, that assume life, relevancy, nation, beyond the limits of enlightenment, notion, self-liberty, and property. What would it mean to consider land, self-decided, agenda, defensibility, that didn't script property, spatialities of colonial conceptions, constrained geographies of exclusion, of exploitation that no longer share the relationalities of presence care that so long been its domain for a common for all, but also land is not just loss of property, territoriality, power, nation, or sovereignty, it's the loss of those philosophies that derive from the relation of the land self-actively fosters and nourishes. This might be understood in the context of the Black Land Project, which affirms blackness is claimed to self-same land, the insistence that blackness is not landless, but it is also not settler colonial, reading landedness through indigeneity, blackness, crafts, and understanding of from political geography that affirms the lived experience of landedness that black people experience. Talk guest and Sultan 14. Another basically balances of the clones been able to reach relation of property making, property ownership, the primary vehicle, civil rights, when making land, property was this covered by making other person, the property, the ranking of land, bodies, and property is necessary for someone to keep other people's land and make property. Black people must be kept landless, decoys, discourse, and practicing making property and ownership is central to hegemonic relations, fellow close man to black is the word of the Black Land Project, which directly clears with Phyllis, theorization of black spatial practice from Kendricks, theorization of black life, and geographically the same time the BLP being systemally of black people's narration of their relation to land, the Black Land Project is engaged in interviews with no construct blackness, and refuse to ever control black people's landless, promoting lyrical points out the creative possibility of blackness is thing. What if the thing is meaning or value has never been found, founds things, and what if the thing has that will have founded something against the very impossibility foundation and against all anti-post foundational possibilities when we say that at the outset we are waiting for the middle of something, that something has to do with black life constructed as landless on sole indigenous land. Land is epistemology and ontology for indigenous peoples and black narratives which recover relationships to that substance land spatial practice is so impressed by human bodies and relation that it's fair to say that one can tell how when he or she felt about the Mississippi of the three dimensions located as the place of the Mississippi as it of any topographical representational space would express its thickest solidity of meaning because it is the cynic apparatus that bristles with man, woman, race, class, region, and the long arcs of desire which sexualities are prolonged and declared the site of the emblematic and mystical court of the memorial. I think there's something profound about the relationship between peoples of African descent and the land because we come from people that don't really land ownership as being as part of material gains here. I think the relation people to land is part of who we are. I think the come from Africa, we come from common communal relation amongst the people who are relating to that which nurtures and supports us. Such a relation with land is very organic, in my opinion. It's meant that we have very personal relation, almost spiritual respect for it, and we're associating that there's a relationship between us and land. Explains the settler savage that only the slave has been afforded cartographical appearance suspended in dislocation. The participants in black land interviews are pressing against this dislocation. They're hearing a different logical logistic one that insists upon the fullness of the exclusive black geography. He describes the substance of blackness in a place. The issue is trying to find the richest meaningless fist. When I want you to hear, I know where I'm going. I'm going back to the hood where they cut heritage impacts. His decision to go back to the hood with the context of anti-black development strategies, which under the guise of increasing diversity in neighborhood trick away black cartographic coherence. TJ suggests that the blackness also is a possibility, but suggesting the sharing of black homelessness be a place which we know, a place which emerges neither subconscious nor knowledge, but of the other, but an improvisation that proceeds from something of the other on the side of an unasked question. Black geographies have been related to the whole of cellular construction of property scarcity. The land is not just what would some people prescribe ownership, receive the land as something that owns their blackness and has not nowhere means that black claims to place happen somewhere else in the land. I know where also includes black double consciousness, so long founded yet founded relationship with self and land, black dislocation within cellular states also in finished and incomplete project. Henceforward, the interest of one will be the interest of all. For the concrete fact, everyone will be discovered, the truth, everyone will be mastered, or everyone will be saved. Joe James meditates on the sovereignty of the word henceforward. It all hinges on the henceforward, because without the henceforward, there's only mutually assured destruction. This resituates relationality outside the frame of Western familial structures, and instead takes up the unnaming and renaming practice communities applied rather than affirm relation kinship. The humanist means the affirmatives of reading black word philosophy, indigenous script theory, resituates care, relation kinship beyond the liberal confines of the human. King 18. About the way the more specific thing of engagement with character pressures from other because pressures not only about preparation, not often, but to revision or recreate something new for herself and church pressures is acting process of renaming toward the end of the novel. Precious slowly sip her chocolate and receive a revelation that I'm alive inside drinking hot chocolate and village with girls and all who love me. I see precious as a subject exposed calling for the community. So I have nothing to prove. Precious part of a community sense of the captive precious and other sense of the enslaved with no recourse to normative categories, affiliation, or free division to create more from relationship with the encouraged to create something new through naming, unnaming, also something as true and universal and article for the motive of living, thriving, destroy the person of the survivors of body, person that the girls make skin within the village over hot chocolate represents community of fugitives. They transform themselves from fringes to all bones precious. The girls who meet each other as strangers become something more than that to one another, resemble harbins, fugitives, and flight who cultivate relationships with another kind of symbolic economy. Harbins practice of good provide relation enables them to create a scene for the reader and illusion mother that makes our fugitives might have to weave relations on the run. It did not matter that they weren't kin or that they spoke a different language because genealogy did not matter. We was the collectivity they built up from the ground on one that inherited, not one that others in post-critical, innovative world-making traditions of black life must envision life outside the current categories that blunt efforts to recraft what it means to be human. There are other ways to name each other as our relations.
Good.
Yeah.
Why talk about settler colonialism and anti-black violence through nuclearism?
Yeah, so we think that the way that we have to understand ontology as a paradigm is one that exists and it exposes itself in various moments of violence. We think that nuclearism is a particularly keen point of insight to understand how that violence takes place.
Why is nuclearism particularly key?
Yeah, so a couple reasons here. So I think our keto and interest evidence are most exemplified of this, that nuclearism and radioactivity actually disproportionately affect Black and Indigenous communities.
Sure, there's a shit ton of stuff that disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous people. That's the world, per your arguments. I'm asking why there's a specific study of nuclearism per the F. What is distinct?
Yeah, so I'm telling you that I think nuclearism provides a really good scholastic project to understand how Southern Postman, because it affects those communities in a profound way
that's not unique, brother. What is that profound thing? What is so profound about it? What is so unique about it?
Yeah, okay, so let's contrast to maybe something like, I don't know, disease vectors, right? So nuclearism would be preferable to that for a number of reasons. One, policy making and policy discourse is much higher on nuclearism as opposed to disease vectors. Second,
so the only reason we should talk about nuclearism is because it's good for discussing policy discourse?
No, I said that policy discourse is a key insight to understanding how ontology functions and exposes
that's
itself.
perfect, even better. That's great. The next thing I want to ask you about is the last piece of King evidence.
Sure.
The first thing I want to ask is that, is there a difference between the relationships that Black people have between each other and the relationships that they can have with Indigenous folks?
Yes and no.
What is from that?
Yeah, so I'll unpack that. So one, I think that the interest evidence is making a claim about how spirituality functions. That might be the kind of no part of that question. But the yes part of that question obviously is that we all come from unique histories of violence that implicate the way that we relate to and with each other.
Right, so I'm asking what about the no part? Why isn't there a distinct difference between the way that Black people relate to each other and kind of...
Yeah, so we think that this, the idea that the spirit makes racial distinctions is potentially dangerous. It buys a type of form of spiritual racism that says that Black people are condemned to a specific type of rape.
That doesn't answer why they would have the same types of kinship structures.
So we're making a theological claim.
So Nico's talking at a theological level. You're asking a question about Black relationality with other Black people. Obviously, there are different relational and kinship structures that exist.
Okay, so then my next question is, why read a king card that is specifically about how only the ancestors of slaves relate to each other and not the relationship between slaves and Indigenous folk?
Yeah.
Why is that the same thing as the AF?
Couple reasons here. One, this King argument is about the way that we think about family and how that violence of family.
That's false. The King evidence is specifically
I disagree.
That piece of it. That's because you didn't get the disagreement to disagree. The King article. I beat you on the King article last time. I promise you, I know about it.
Actually, you did.
Okay, so I'm gonna finish my question. The King article is talking about.
If you want to keep making arguments,
the King article.
but I'm telling you that the King article is not
remember that. Remember this. We'll stop it right there. Thanks, Nico. You lost.
You look, I saw you. You look. What'd he say?
You got this.
Yo, Ryan, is this yours? Right here.
Almost got me. I really wanted to look.
Barlow, what's a good email for you? For whatever reason it says that you don't have.
Barlow 15.
Willie, did you add her to the email change?
I got a mailing email response from an adult. MBARLO. Oh, M Barlow. Okay.
I went upstairs. I really wanted to see that. I was thinking about making another after that.
I'll make like a 5-off track.
Yeah, he is not fast enough.
The pro left is
Everybody got it.
What's your word? Just press cancel.
What's your word? Just wrong. The one sees opposition to settled colonialism through the rejection of normative debate construction in favor of counter-theorizing positions of the affirmative as the role of the critical academic who comes to present their findings to the state of the native. This is the professionalization of the academy per action where negligence is appropriate to weaponize in favor of an auto-encyclopedic mode of recognizing validity abuses. The study of intake must performed by the act an accident damning mode of incorporation and turns through mediation to modality genocide hardened and Moten 13. The condition of possibility of production of knowledge in the university, not ability of out labor, is rather to be critical academic universities to be against the university, being against the university is also recognized and recognized by the Institute of negligence of the internal insight to act and being against always already excluding the unrecognized modern modes of politics beyond the politics already in motion discredited. Criminal prior organizations such negligence is the essence of professionalization taking the form of choice and exclusive prophetic organization of the unconscious. No point in turn to hold it out of the university against professionalization. They are the same. Maroons refuse to be against a university against it. Since a critical claim that there is left beyond that its critical waste of professionalization constitute themselves in opposition unregulated and to be ignorant without acknowledging unregulated, ignorant, unprofessional labor goes on not the opposite of them but within them. It is their professional education is not progress but is counterinsurgency coming from the discredited professionalization is state strategy because it does not want to control education and opposed to war with the encyclopedic always as an impulse to state or enlightenment to be in the universities is a support and auto-encyclopedic project. The state is enlightenment to be much against the university, however, creates dangerous specific elements in the state that taking steps to get rid of itself in the contradiction of the university is placing it with some other forms of social reproduction. It is therefore I should think of professionalization as a narrowing and better to think of it as a circling of war wages in the last camp of indigenous despair. Understanding of settler colonialism is rooted in discussion of sovereign loss. The distances from the red light theorizing the causes of ruse that assumes that advocacy and debate translates to outside gains for native causes. Coalition breakdown in native towards black bodies refuse bodies via a ruse of sovereignty in favor of the world order. Bro, 17. Settler master mishead recognition has led to native fighting debates and prioritizing coherent discussion of sovereign laws and to articulate ourselves and always in conversation and the settler in 3 disses ourselves and black right theorizing these 3 moves are all anti-black reputation of sovereignty, land reparation and treaty rights are only solutions genocide to abandon arguments not for the state sovereign benefits for native people to struggle for sovereignty itself does not overcome the soul genocide the removal of look what all it has to stand standing rock should be approved non-native debaters and native debaters are talking essentially in state registered native becomes a co-extension within the land debate the gesture towards conceptual coherence and therapeutic sovereignty debate and genocide and anti-black debate is inevitably space of recognition, coherence, and transparency traumatized. Under levels of activity is continuing the inevitable parasitic regime of recognition, traumatized subject offers a structural analytic as always a parasitic on blackness, blatant being politics only interested in integrating a greater subject with fundamental innocent and have punishing native people and intercommunal policing strategies use trauma as a site of authenticity, trauma and authenticity split between each other, discourse in which authorized to use and not see native experience in service of land-based arguments, trauma and authenticity becoming easy disciplinary mechanism of creating effective investments in white racial kinship. Native people are relying on settler master regimes of recognition. Native people are always insecure to seek to prove our authenticity by articulating in terms of trauma. Such trauma can only authorize an authenticity so far as can be made coherent. A white judge this justifies a slippage away from blackness and prioritizing anti-black racial anxieties over actual conversation beyond ontology, murdering non-black people in debate must begin speaking the registering a coherent speaking conception with black people in debate and the avoidance of conversation can only be rooted in anti-blackness will always produce anti-blackness. Native people can recognize by simple instruction black people have no registered coherence and a coherent test. So that's far led to non-black people being collectively invested in ourselves in anti-black relation debate. Our working is creating a settler, a native binary that erases our nuclearized blackness, anti-black state for prison.
black people, the position of blackness as a subversive, a person to subtle collision, debate, neglecting, indebtedness, and debaters, intellectual argument, labor, black debaters, coaches, and judges. The alternatives to staying the whole blackness is a better starting point, rejected our appeals to communicability. We should abandon hope in this space. There's no communicability for blackness. 13, the blacks are understanding beings the structure of the entire world, systematic field structure featured by anti-black scholar, the structural position with non-commutability in face of all the positions, meanings, and non-commutable because of position blackness, predicate on modalities of communication, vulnerability, non-exploitation, alienation, relation, analogies, understanding, seeing that impression of power structure, transcendental subject, assured by relative nothingness that can only be manifested as a general absence of relations and relative nothingness of black shows up political ontology, relation, counter relation, impossibility, political uncertainty, can be said to both consider anything in social animation with impossibility, political interactivity, or exhaustive political ontology backs away from forcing sociological path and words against the limiting force and invitation. Emphasis as well, difference between pessimism and optimism lies not in the description of power relation remains word project the difference in space between the assertion of relative nothingness of black people facing the subjectivity and habitation of a positionality insofar as who also signifies an absolute nothingness which are entire relative content approach and the enacting of infinities between structured aspects of mysticism undergrid and trouble metaphysics gestures towards the displacement of a certain black capacity desired ontological rationality both against the grain and away from non-negation of contradiction or relative nothingness. Black studies a place where something akin to absolute nothingness as a radical evidence in these convergences into the whole and social life of black beings and the whole blackness and imagination are one. In the meantime, what will happen to it remains to be inhabited as nothing itself in its fullness of the absence of interactivity, relationality, instrumental interruption of telos by moonshine shows up a radical space in a binary logic moving through negation. Picture. There's a strategic exclusion, which we saw the Canadian Afghan strategic exclusion is key to combating subtle colonialism. Always in expanding the text is similar logical colonialism control, strategic exclusion, disrupt the ability to sacrifice life on the altar of intelligibility. Pfizer 13. Certain colonies, many activists have unified and desire for bigger tinted greater windows and thinking opacity solution or problems any solution needed all positions tragedy or mind value the global weapons opacity exclusion. We must form a synergy to avoid opacity strategically as they reject the close of empire most contemporary forms of political opposition rely solely on combating opacity and refusing exclusion of all cost state power requires and enforce the eligibility of modern states strives on the ability to know subject comprehensively with the practice of eligibility including standardization of language and legal distortion standard grid where it is essentially recorded and monitored there's a system of differentiation standardization political least consolidated authority these maps and standard lexicons back always become lost in the claims that injustice and happiness were to displace the colonial context also Native American communities with problem opacity limits of all the colonial gains resulting in anxiety which is constitutive of a form of the colonial visibility and inclusion have become intrinsic of all same political strategic opacities and intelligence disrupt governability forms of resistance which have been successful with visibility opacity strategically conscious are raising massive station reflective belief that radical change might come through an adequate visibility and inclusion must cultivate offensive opacity strategically to gain strength and opposition good against cross-sex was a performance of microaggressions of opposites independently to vote them down and turns the entire the case of warrant of 15 black years successful problematic not fully understanding the ways of political distortion and interpreted and deep equator nor optimism can articulate political pollution and pollution beyond outside the symbols of the broad space meaning every radical population with the anti-humanist or value-humanist and never getting the complicit in its violence on the board of violence is made some all black optics in form of forms of anti-blackness not properly theorized under differentiation assumes of homogenous objects polarized by monolithic violence and continuously cities ways which by anti-blackness cuts the object we need a way of describing violence directed towards the inconceivable blackness and then beingness of the black and the lack of propaganda outside the humanist and name both the target of violence and the violence itself the theoretical problem that redoubles itself in physical forms of destruction. This on-site is a meaning of non-ontology blackness, the same conditions of anti-blackness, human condition of suffering, this being situated as a side of violence, the good and cold black, clear, but it is that being that does not exist within ontology, existential horizon, the existence only existence of those beings that have such a low frequency, they exist in becoming consequential bodies without force with the nerves of life moving in the future, the flesh and presence of the world cannot be said really to exist for all of black who is here, trapped in the methodological quagmire. There's no dread condition of black who is a condition that we must continue to theorize around, even if we can never actualize approach it. There, romanticize the depiction of living reality with and through land is a reenaction of terrorists until the spiritual universalization of connectivity and agency and also modernized to diminish 14 nihilism exists in the economy by shaping the constitution of identity, motivation, difference, and forms of indigenous face differences, omniscience, reinforces global identities and global forms of governance, imposed forms of green development, fits like the commodification of indigenous people's relationships to territories by the recognizing indigenous people's legitimate forms of users by the universalizing means of indigeneity and neoliberalism brings previously untraceable and suggestions effective relation and cultural practices to the market neoliberalism such shape forms of recognition, environmental organization as a support the idea that unclear property regimes and effective land use or regulation are connected to high levels of property, language, property rights, not only protecting these communities but also protecting access to things within their lands, connection between the realms of property and the indigenous essential configuration of new commodities and areas of economic activity, including climate change mitigation, which is noble establishment of the allied market. Allied, the one of these affirmation relationality describes neo-contractual arrangement of care that becomes sacralized in line with social organization and kinship metropolis. 12 mutuals maintain a greater emphasis on familial attachment and genealogical reappears in modified forms, research and family recurs in most of performative risky arrangements and economic subsistence play and attachment. Butler are suggest that in appearances, Bernie re-articulation of kinship often possibly re-signified in terms of violation in ways in which a direct performance is organized to the house implies more than the genealogical kinship stuff, class mobility and conventional aspirations of all culture of drag family career, queer grabbings around the house loving the father not only perform game maximum the conventional gender familial roles and queer registered, they also the tenuous and still perform game maximum of contract of because we're Dean barebacking subculture signals changes in social organization and kinship relationality and direct culture but not ethically trouble less to radical departure from the mainstream values of direction and then repeats of familiar culture repeating of verses composes itself not only a question of generation material kinship but also the contractual allocation of risk and mortality contract discussed up previous.
Cool. Good?
Yeah.
Alright, so my first question is like, how do we know if someone is against the universe? So like, what does that mean? What's the parameter we use to understand?
Right, we're not going to tool this card in the sense that like you have entered yourself or
Agreement to an adjustment to something that is acceptable and affirmable by the.
Okay, so it's a question of like
is
moving
a
that to a
process
particular
of
way.
like maladjustment that is bad.
What is opacity? What is it, or actually, a better question is, what does it mean to be opaque?
I mean, that's probably a question you have to answer since you're for it, okay?
The Pizer evidence says
yeah.
is
So
good.
the
I'm
Pizer-
just
the
like,
Pizer
what
evidence-
is it mean
Yeah,
to be
so,
opaque?
okay, so the Pizer evidence is in the context of what it means to be outside of the ability to be interpolated, or to not to be interpolated, but the outside of the ability to interpolate, right? So it's not the idea of that we
Okay,
should
outside of the
regulate-
ability, how do we know that? What's the parameter?
So like
we use
for
to judge
instance,
that?
it's like I can kind of give an example to say this. It would be like instead of doing the processes of attempting to be like we should talk about, for instance, the relationality of precious and bodies. It would be the ability to just let that happen, right? Our argument is that the process of studying that is what corrupts those politics.
Okay, I guess that how do you feel that interacts with the Newton evidence that right does affirm a particular form of study?
Oh, because we think that that's kind of the line of competition that would draw is that the motive study that you would offer is one that seeks to include negligence, which ultimately creates a certain maladjustment to structures of power, which we think ultimately depurify politics. But we think that the alternative's different form of study is one that allows negligence to remain negligent.
Okay, so
because we believe
negligence.
blackness
What
in
is
and of
sovereignty?
itself-
What is sovereignty?
Authority over particular beings and things like.
Okay, so authority over like land or people is like what
like,
sovereignty is.
One that is particularly justified
Okay,
or seemed
cool.
justified.
So then I have a question about this like Jamira's cover. Like this is kind of already happening in the status quo. Is it just like the research project of the app is like in line with that? Does reading the app make it uniquely worse?
Oh yeah, our argument is that the examples that the Julian's card are isolating are examples that we will say that the app participates in and results in forms that the other ones.
Okay, cool. And then my last question is, what does it mean for it to be romanticized?
To say things like, you know, that there is a like romanticization is the process by which we attempt to purify the types of relationalities or things that you say that you engage in.
Okay.
i.e. the similar depictions that you've given in the body.
Cool.
Can I ask this question? What is the whole? Is it just inclusive of the world, or
Wait, sorry, what?
what is the whole, and is it inclusive of the world?
Well, I don't think we think that the world is created by the slave ship, but we think the whole is particularly spaces of black sociality which are negligent and should be innocent.
Okay.
switch. Yeah, record yourself.
Alright, we'll stop her at 8. Actually, no, stop her.
Okay, keep starting now.
For me to sign.
Alright, now stop her at 7.
Literally just came up on my phone and was working on shit.
That's sweet.
Yours can be case, then is anybody not ready?
You're not ready.
They're not.
Thank you. I thought you were going to start speaking from back there.
Right, I'm going to know what the fuck going on.
You're ready. Not for that.
Alright. Everyone good?
Hey, if y'all see somebody with 5 guys in mind, don't let them leave.
Two impacts in the affirmative that are not answered. Earthquakes taking out missile silos, squirrels destroying energy grid, bombs dying, reconstituting themselves, which is not the notion ecological living that their evidence is about the relationality, bad evidence. It's evidence about drag shows and queer kinships that still have formal structures such as the father or the mother. Argument disassociates kinship from the family, which is our cosmological argument about the necessity of the internally incarnate favorite impact framing of hyper-education that incessantly affirms black sociality and black landness along with the aspiration of native spirituality. This is all of our bird evidence. This framework is important for 2 reasons. First is relationality will be affirmed throughout a way of living and carrying the midst of violence. That's the argument. The example that they give is when Hartman tabulates and leaves her mother. She's not engaging in humanistic project or Egyptian, but rather engaged in the critical innovative world, making a black light that affirms its infinite generativity, which internally turns the majority arguments of land. And this part of colonialism, anti-black project, the to render black people go through the appropriation of land and utilizing blackness as spatial marker, which will build landness and unable to be secured. This constant affirmation of black landness not only disrupts this project by combating systems anti-blackness inside of but affirms the infra-political reality, which proves the impact level of the arguments. Okay. The assholes and outweighs the affirmative hypothetical framework would destroy the cell of anti-black medicine, which which the academies can condition of possibly a minimum the pedagogical care the affirmative towards outweighs and creates ways of living. If the whole creates a foundation for rule, there's needs to be a conceptualization of how the internally arguments, the assumption of this argument is that there's a question about how you create affective arguments. The link to it is a claim that we affirm or we respond to the topic. You responded to the act, which means you're reactionary in the same level to at some level, but also proves that the legacy of 80s policy debate haunts us. You should affirm this view. This is functionally a permutation to both arguments. The permutation realizes that the project could be affirmed that the naked might have slippage, but they can learn from doing the process of care and study, which discards the each of understanding compatible with the protector. The affirming the Nico's performance the only sees that protest is fundamentally violence of yours is logically folds aimlessly back into the frame of is proven when they describe the one AC as study, not spiritual, much like Standing Rock. Nico is not protesting, he's protecting this form of thinking with the land of them, with the judges, the conceptual difference in line with their theoretical lexicon. This is Modern Party and 13 refusing to be for against the University of Intellectuals and capable of the University of Future where works is done with work gets subverted the service intellectuals, neither trying to extend the university, no change the university subject to intellectual 1220 misery. The mission is to recognize that you seek to make things better, not just doing for the other, but you're doing for yourself. The coalition works to the recognition that it's fucked up for you studies and mode of thinking, other way separates the thinking institution requires you to are part of it embedded is what a hard need called to with them for the lives you spent all this time antagonizing. Even if their argument is true about inclusion, the nativeness takes upon a fugitive aesthetic that the moment is entered in the frame, reflecting back nothing more than what settlers expect, which the real movement happens elsewhere. You should both flow this as a response to their pro evidence, but also their mode and harmony evidence. This is Mono and Ritzky's and 14 fugitivities, not a flexion battle, defense, production, and posture, predation, violence, colonies, the fugitivity finds an energy, put it in the range of local power, and control, colonialism, opaque corporation, benefication, and culture that is the hidden, that itself emotion, the future aesthetic, liminal practice, the culture and aesthetic production, and raised from these moment of refusal to bait capture, proclamation, renewed through the creative negation, colonial locations, and sensing bird, calls indigenous arts and global system, radical alternative works, that's simultaneously reveals and distorts colonial logic practices, disruption occurs, cellular discourse, appropriation, inclusion, or disrupt by indigenous from member, repressing indigenous, radical alternative before the aesthetic against the law, rather than one that can demand recognition or refusal, is framed against a colonial logic, is rights and cellular relationships, properties, both material, and is both material, but it's also a concept that's pragmatic orders in mind. The settler king discredits the relation between settler construction, both for indigenous people and space from black people, and black places. The impact is inevitable. The academy would utilize Nico as the model minority if he reads policy. He was regarded as the interesting down project facing opaque. He also thought of as a cultural studies department if he reads the chaos. Also, the alternative doesn't resolve any of the internal link arguments. It's still a study of the whole. It's a study of a particular mechanism of politics, which means all their inevitable link differential arguments don't really conceptually make sense. There's also no link to this argument. It seems that we are a study or only reactionary. No, an ontological claim can only make sense insofar as there are particular examples. It's the basis of inductive versus deductive reasoning. You have to have small examples to prove an ontological claim. Otherwise, we create bad models of politics that just lead to violence, which is all about care arguments. That when you just put the cart before the horse about care, ignores that care is a messy relationship that can't be constituted. This is the cross-sex answer that when Nico was giving about the differences between relationality, which is why our rereading of King along with Bird is important, because it understands kinship not as a structure of humanism, but a one that is extricated from the argument, which means the argument there's also no impact to the majority of arguments. Turn the affirmative is good in the academy. Affirmation, digit spirituality intervenes into the object-subject relation, which is the internal link argument, which will outweigh the majority of the arguments. Permutation be the act, and then the alternative all, and then it's the unique drop in the brackets and affirms response for much larger violence. But it also, their alternative is a double turn with the King, where their bro evidence begins to grow up, and it says that you need to create cross-cultural linkages between black and red theorization that understands there are possibilities of interrelatedness that aren't just based in sovereignty. I'll answer the bro evidence because it's still largely the only piece of offense they have on this page. First, this evidence is not applicable. The evidence is a critique of sovereignty, which isn't the act. It's a criticism of giving back the land because it ignores the agency of the land itself. It literally says representations of sovereignty, land repatriation, and treaty solutions are viewed as the only solution. There's two answers to this. First is the act is actually necessary to solve this. It intervenes into how natives think about settler colonialism versus sovereignty. It says that sovereignty or inclusion is based on a misrecognition that attempts to grasp towards humanity vis-a-vis Western notions of sovereignty, but instead our argument says that relationships with land are not constituted via sovereignty, but instead a cosmological relationship, which proves the argument. You should read this majority through a Bird evidence because it internally turns the question, the whole argument. First, the first of the argument, the evidence relies upon a Hegelian theorization of what social relations means, which must affirm a politics of recognition while simultaneously rendering the relationships that black people have with the more than human world as non-relationships. You should not allow the truancy to spin the alternative as somehow separate to their kinship arguments on case argument, because their claim that there is no relationality for black people ignores all of the empirical examples or black land project evidence indicates that the relationship that black people have with land is productive, the intelligibly bad argument. First is, opacity is not somehow radically or destructive to everything. The Smithsonian has postmodern paintings that literally just have no meaning when white people just speculate about what they mean, which means their alternative doesn't resolve this, but also the alternative isn't opacity. You are still a study of something, which means I don't understand what the internal link argument to this argument, but you should understand all of these arguments as manifestations for why the affirmative's intervention is necessary. There will probably be inevitably a pick in the 2NC that says you should refuse to respond to the topic. We have a few arguments here. First is you will consider Andres evidence that says thinking through nuclearism is important for how we come to terms with kinship, because kinship communities are manifested by political actions. You can think about this the way in which environmental destruction is magnified by nuclear attacks or nuclear destruction that shape the relationship with the environment, which means toxicity is a net benefit to voting affirmative that they do not have a response to in the 1NC, which means the large majority of the arguments are really responsive.
The sovereign loss argument is kind of answered. You should read the story Bird argument that says loss is not just loss of sovereignty, but a capacity that shapes how we understand it.
One of your last arguments about kinship in the context of nukes, I guess how are nukes the structuring way the familiar relationships?
So they're not arguments that kinship is a messy structure. It is not based on a universal description, right? Arguments, nukes, and analyzing particularities of nukes, the way in which they both cross time but also cross spaces, creates toxic geographies, toxic relationships that manifest what it means to have a nuke.
Sure,
so you can think about this.
What is that intrinsic relationship to familiar structures?
So I guess this is kind of.
And how does that help you resolve or create forms of care?
So I guess the easiest answer is think about the way in which relationships on the Navajo reservation are constituted when there's literal uranium mining that creates instances of cancer, the way in which that causes deaths in the family, the way in which that influences
how is that
what it means. Arguments, those are important
You
analyses.
said that framing the protective DA, you said that Nika is not protesting, he is protecting. What is he protecting?
Well, so it's the kind of argument that it's the care argument, that it's not a
He's
reaction.
protecting care.
So that care is always imminently created, right?
I'm asking, what is Nika protecting?
What is Nico protecting? So it kind of, argument would be it's a defense of something positive versus a reaction. Right? Your argument would be that the app is reactionary, that's responding to the topic because it talks about
App is
nukes.
not reactionary, it's centered around nukes as a way
Yeah.
of explaining.
Our
the kinship
argument
and
says that
relationships.
responding to the topic or talking about nukes
Link
isn't
is not
just
a
a
response to the
isn't
topic.
just a
You
negative thing that
argue
says
with it.
topics are bad or that nukes are bad,
How
but
do
instead that it's
kinship
affirmative
relationships look like post-affirmative?
What do you say?
What do forms of kinship and familiar relationships look like post-affirmative?
So that's a very, very vague question. We would have a few
I mean, if
answers.
you have
First is,
solvency, then
yeah, so argument
you have
says that
answers.
that they would be disassociated from heteronormative family structures
Okay,
such
so
that
what
they
does
are
that
not
look like?
limited,
Give an
right? So you can
example
think-
of what that would look like.
So the Black Land Project is one of those examples, right? The way in which Black people have had connections to New Orleans, the way in which the Navajo relationship to uranium mining, the way in which, for an example that King gives, right? Like
And
what
why,
happens
saying,
when
why are those examples, I guess, transformative forms of kinship?
arguments not like they transform.
Or why are they
social-
different?
Why are they different? Because there's a difference between locating care or kinship structures solely within family structures. You've impact turned that on the case page.
Yeah,
We
cool.
said
So, I
that's
guess-
the ass argument.
How does the app thing go about promoting care?
How does it go about promoting care? Like, in the sense of like, what care does
You
the
made
app?
a lot of arguments about, I guess,
Yeah,
creating-
argument says that disassociating care with the family is necessary to open up space to think different ways of care. We have given you multiple examples of what
Once
that
we
means.
think about care, then how
Right,
do we
so all of our
how do
arguments
we go
about
about then providing
representation
care?
are one example that we explicitly defend that says thinking nature is agential is a way to create care for and with the environment.
Interesting.
I think they're gonna pay for us. It's the
I can.
I was gonna pay for
You're not gonna feed me?
you. Did you call me little girl?
You wanna do grades?
Are you hungry? Are you hungry? Did they pay for you? Or you took grades for us?
Do you know what get paid for?
They pay for our food.
If I get some food?
No, they're not paying for it.
They're not
today.
paying for today. We mean at tournaments, they pay for everything. Yeah, so you want anything?
What do you want me to do? No,
You can do something cheap like McDonald's or Church's Chicken. You can
Which
do
one? McDonald's or?
Church's Chicken.
Okay.
You do Subway. Wait, how much is Church's Chicken? There's a smoothie place we could try. They do food too. They do smoothies and sandwiches usually. There's a Mexican place. They do a smoothie place. You want to do smoothies?
Fucking good, this is not very real.
They have like flatbreads and wraps and shit.
Alright, I can do it. One night, one never.
Actually, we don't have to.
No, I got it.
Should I get the Maker Magic for the kiwi plant?
It's not over.
Fuck this movie. I'm thinking what else.
Okay.
Those sacred things.
Hmm?
Those sacred things.
Oh, you want to say because I want to say because you didn't say that.
Those sacred things. Can you text me?
Yeah, I'm about to.
But tell him he's got it. Give him a juice. It's not expensive, right?
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable. How much is the delivery fee?
$2.29.
Huh? What? You want to order with this? You want to order with this? No? He's funny. Okay,
Order time breaker?
Why you want to order?
Show me a little box.
Alright, it's a Kaden case.
I feel like this is gonna be a lot.
9 minutes.
Last time you had
You order?
I was still 9 minutes. But I talked a lot.
I've been there.
Oh, they had it.
Wow, that's a southern thing.
Is it?
Well, no, because like most northeastern people say most like the people down south.
No. That, yeah, just Darius put me on the fence. I mean, cash out. So I've been using
You said
it.
you don't care about being my girl, care about Ben.
Actually, I came to that room to see that.
Barlow, you
You
ready?
don't care about Ben.
Barlow, you ready?
I appreciate you.
Alright,
They're gonna call me out. Willie ain't gonna shut down here.
because I told you. You guys ready?
You get it for this last year. Better be good.
You're all good. Alright, ready?
Hold on.
Oh my god.
This is ready, bro. Get up. Oh, sweet. First time I said you might. Alright. Criticism outweighs the church the case for a couple reasons. The first is the hardening mode, evidence assessing the universe, shots, society, social reproduction that determines all sorts of odds and increasing study of negligence, forms of odds that accompanies in order to demystify some create forms of protocols that are hailed to order. The mode evidence says that this hailed to order is always already to incorporate difference into the universe, shots itself to reproduce that same forms of odds and map out the state it creates for the socialized internalized forms of odds because it creates forms of results about that is repetition, compulsion, this adds the way which the affirmative operates, this calls the universe in the way it hails them to order, ultimately creates a compulsion to constantly study and always recreate study that demobilizes movements and also creates a form of academic pleasure where the academy is able to use mobilizations of negligence in order to map out for the state how it operationalizes values and controls every other impact. This Ferguson 12. movement that rearticulate the nation state, capital mediator, state, civil side, by minoritized difference, academy began the ground for state capital schemes with minority difference in sight, of real representation, extended which we extend the academy things, the academic society, the economics, the measure of our depends on the street, the academies, and archive, constantly find a crowd that the last relation intervention is puts the reverse things to make you respect the law. The academy has always been an economic domain and determine who gets and meanwhile establishing the rules for membership or participation with the admission of the women and people of color to predominate by academic studies. The academy began honestly about their time, so based about the ways to make those subjects are in the knowledge of respect, power, and as well as the academy. Put up for the archival genesis, state capital messages for the exclude such according to the new order. This will power will dream of ways from difference to keep it ahead of the signature achievements of power to make the pursuit of recognition of just being a formal horizon pleasure, state of particularity, capital meet the academy to rear their sensitivity toward the affirmation of difference and then also that the academy begin the laboratory for the revitalization of differences of the legislative the concept of new form of power organized up around the affirmation, recognition and legitimacy matter life differences with the students often offered as grammatical critiques of institutional belonging will be turned into various institutions confirmation. This frames your impact after this because it determines the relationship between state-based violence and the academy. If we win, they reify the academy. They can't solve the impacts of the act because they would just create a new map for things like nuclear colonialism, etc. that happen in the spaces of care that they say they isolate. Now we'll do like debate at the top. There are a couple of disasters from it. I don't think they'll be able to get out. The first is the minority evidence. It's professionalization. It says that the ways in which you understand a study of the negligent fundamentally recuperates the academy and does the form of recuperation into the prioritizes then the first evidence is the key for the state and the capital re-emerge and create new forms of difference that are police out of the minority evidence that things like your study of practice and the king card, etc. attempt to create a romanticization of that form of relationality, i.e. King's ability to say that practice had a beautiful moment with her friends that were around her, etc. All create a moment that never allows the negligent to wallow in that moment that destroys those spaces of social activism because they always make a question when they're respectful enough to be talked about in the first place, i.e. what examples do you leave out when you talk about practice? What relationalities that aren't so pretty that you don't talk about? It turns out they're stumbling arguments because it proves that they don't actually care about those who stumble, only those that are resilient in the face of things like anti-blackness and anti-indigeneity, etc. which proves that they don't actually care about the forms of mescalination. They're talking about also proves that there's a crackdown argument that happens as a result. People like practice, etc. get excluded for the types of illegal things and illicit things that have to do and to make that for precarious relationality happen in the first place, i.e. there's a crackdown on our ability to study these movements because we make them representable in the first place. You create a coherent grammar for studying practice with the idea of a hypersubjectivity that makes it impossible for us to create an incoherent grammar which means exclusivity between the alternative and the affirmative, which they will do. And the one and all, the second argument is the bro evidence. It has a couple DAs to the affirmative, but you can label the sovereign loss here. Our argument is that you are not land reparations, rather your understanding and very conversation about the land begins in the wrong place for a couple reasons. The first is that your response to the topic that you knew was coming, but you still responded to it wrong, was a wrong call to the resolution. Our argument is that the ways in which you respond to resolution creates a coherent grammar to speak about native and anti-black violence, and the bro evidence says makes it impossible to create ties between native and black debaters and people on the outside because it assumes the ability to create grammar to make things like blackness and put them into continued grammars, which is impossible. The bro evidence says that this is impossible because blackness itself and the types of gratuitous violence that it speaks to is ultimately an incoherent grammar that they don't gain access to. The ability for them to attempt to create a grammar for describing that, i.e. the contingency of nuclearism, is an attempt to create a relationality that is suture incoherence, which is always already humanist. Taylor says that this poisons their relationality because it makes it impossible for us to think about relationality beyond the human because we still encapsulate that grammar even when we attempt to be anti-human, which means all their arguments about how they move outside the forms of relationality that we are going to be speaking of should be highly speculative coming out of the block. The next argument, the bro argument, makes it that the way in which you attempt to create the relationality in the first place is fucked up. This is why I asked about you in the 1AC, why I asked why you read the King evidence in the first place. The King evidence is a specific study of the ways in which certain black societal spaces happen, the ways in which Precious was able to navigate those spaces. Your ability to apply those things to things like native and black relations is a ruse of coherence that assumes that it is the same type of relation. Barlow, you know that the way that we, Willie talk to each other will never be the same fucking way that we talk to Nico. That is fundamentally because there's a different way in which we are able to articulate ourselves. That is not a coach talk about, which is why you shouldn't use the forms of ontology, etc. to put negligent people into the academy in the first place. This proves that your theory of power is fucked up. Now, I'll spend a lot of time on my mind here to get rid of all their shitty offensive arguments. This is the assholes now waste because of the nuclear violence is happening now. But our argument is that our impact structure is because as long as the academy is able to make spaces of black and indigenous relationality is able to make those spaces legible, then it inevitably co-opts and destroys those spaces, makes it impossible for the AI to win their solvency claim. They say they respond to the topic, but we also respond to them. First of all, it's not the same thing. Our argument is about the call to order, not the call to fucking conversation. Our argument is about a debate required to create a protocol about how we go about our arguments, how we word them, etc. Which we all think are bad. Which are bad to create coherency that is fundamentally lacking when we try to use that coherency to speak to black people, which is different than the ability for us to have regular conversations. It's not a question of whether or not we should talk to each other, all but rather protocols that we use to establish that conversation. We said the one has done that wrong. Let's say the protector DAA. The question that I had to ask is, what the fuck is Nico protecting? Is he protecting the scholarship that he's forwarding? the one I see because that will lead back to all of our arguments? Or is he protecting the types of the impact that he's actually talking about, the material realities? The reason why this distinction is important is because if he is talking about the material realities and protecting those, then it begs the question of why do the protocols of debate in the fucking first place? Doing and reading the speech, as the Brit evidence says, does nothing to actually change those violences. Voting out doesn't say that Nico has protected anything, nor does it mean Nico has fucking saved anything. So it's a question of what he is trying to protect in that context. If it is not, then it's only a defensive scholarship we've already indicted and links back to all our other arguments. They said permutation do both, that'll be in the water. They said that they said that nativeness is fugitivity. This is the piece of evidence that the second piece of evidence that Jacob read. First of all, this is a reason. The original fugitives were fucking slaves, which is why the term was created in the first place. It was the ability for us to flee from the plantation, which is coherent to the prison industrial complex. Your ability to suture that and say that nativeness in and of itself is that essence is a type of co-option that is the problem with this fucking types of coherence. Is trying to speak the language relationality through your attempt to say that we can relate to each other always coheres itself through the possibility of saying that we are actually the same thing instead of talking to the differences that create those things, i.e. your ability to talk about fugitivity while separating it from the exact plantation proves that you create a coherent grammar to understand natives, but only insofar as you can co-opt black grammars of trying to understand violence. They said that the impact is inevitable. The alternative, we'll solve that. That's the one and all. They say we can't solve the links on DDO do that. They said that ontological claims are warranted by example. I did this above. It's a link to the criticism. They say they care is messy. This isn't responsive to any of your arguments that you don't give a fuck about messy care. They say the king is with the king evidence written through the bird evidence is important, but that's our argument is that you have professionalized the king evidence through your ability to pair with other evidence to make a claim that it doesn't fucking make, which is why you're fundamentally bankrupt. Let's say from to the after also no one on the bro evidence turns the alternative because it says that cross-cultural engagement did no, it doesn't mandate that we engage in cross-cultural engagement. It just says that it just says that natives should do more in terms of evidence. But start trying to speak in coherency. They said that bro evidence is about giving back the land, which I say is not above. They say evidence is alien, that'll be the one in our black man project. Good case. Not going for the more stuff, it doesn't matter, but the aging, they say that they don't actually not one of that. I want to go for the contractualism is that it's mishandled. The Metropolis evidence says that the way in which you try to get new relationalities outside of that of the human ultimately is bankrupted by forms of neoliberalism, i.e. your ability to say that we should all have relations to the land, and without that, we have a bankrupt politics. Our argument is that your mandate that black people go back to the land, where it represents the question is, what if we refuse? The Metropolis evidence says that this is exactly how your contractual relationships destroy the ability for us to consent to doing the act in the first place, i.e. what does it mean for black people to not want to go back to the fucking lynching trees, etc. Your act mandates this because anytime we say that we shouldn't have a relationship with land, you say that we're fucked up to other black people, which means that we prove that you are that refuses always complain to other black people that want to do your politics. It means there's always a necessity for even when you study the negligence to choose which negligent people you choose. None of your arguments are able to solve this because you said that you remove from the family, but arguments that you reinstantiate the same types of calls to order that are necessitated by the family, which reinstantiates forms of humanism and liberal. Yeah.
Are you good?
Yeah.
What is the academy?
We think that the academy is a set of protocols that invades our ability to create coherent understandings of the world around us.
So a set of protocols, what are the protocols that was meant to create a grammar constitutes the academy?
The protocols are the attempt to make a coherent grammar that is legible.
What
and
constitutes coherence?
So coherency is the ability to assign certain contingent factors as explanations for how the world functions. So it's like
what do you mean by contingent?
Like coherency is when you are like ontological claims only make sense when you have examples. That process is the process of coherence.
Okay, so then the alternative is just making claims with no examples? Like what's the difference between...
Because our alternative refuses the call to study the negligent because the Newton evidence says that blackness in and of itself is imaginative. That's what I was saying by the fact that the relationships that, for instance, I have towards Barlow, towards Collins, towards Willie, towards the other black folk in this room should all remain negligent. I should not have to come in...
What is negligence?
So Newton says that the negligent are what the critical academics attempt to study to make their grammar for their theories coherent, which are like, they are the examples for the ontological claims.
No, that's just like... So
no, I'm saying that that's literally what he's saying, is that when people make the claims about their theory, the examples, the people that they're studying to make those theories coherent are the negligent.
So I guess in that instance, how is the study of the whole not...
You haven't studied the whole.
Your argument, so...
You said remain in the whole.
Then I guess what is the relationship debate has to the whole then? What is it?
I mean, debate is part of the slave ship that we're all on. We think that the whole is not a static place, but rather is the relationality that we embody when we come into contact with other black people.
So I guess let's think about this in the context of your evidence you read in the 2NC. It's an evidence of student movements. How is the scholarship that produces, your historical examples of student movements being co-opted, also not a study of negligence, just the opposite way?
Well, no, the study that the Ferguson doing, the Ferguson
genealogy.
Yeah,
Like,
sorry, Ferguson is saying that these were people, I guess in the context of the Midland Hardy characters that we were asking about the relation between the two, is that Ferguson was doing a study of the critical academics, which is different than a study of the negligent.
How so?
Because
Your argument would seem to presume that the people
Because the
also
negligent don't have access to the academy or to the university.
So is there, so no negligent has access to the university?
Negligent, yeah, that's the category of negligent.
But so
Negligent
then,
are those that do not
your
have
argument would
access to the
say
academy or study and
that the
incorporate
people that
concepts.
study people in the university are also putting them in a position of negligence.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is that negligence is the ability to like incorporate the stories of those bodies, but not those bodies themselves. So it's like you can study them and be like, this happened to them, but that is not an
If they're in the
incorporation of
university but
negligence.
not in the story, or what happens to someone that was in the university that leaves the university, right? The student movement, people graduated. So on.
Oh, I mean, first year in study, close grad.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you. What you want to do?
Oh, wow. It should be going down.
Are you just going okay? Or I'm sorry, okay. Just hold it. Okay. But no case. No case.
Hey, you need to get that chip on.
Needed that. From back in life. You see back at work. What's that? This one? For now?
Trash.
Nay. Oh wait, do you really like churches?
Put your hands together.
What sort of year?
Nay, do you want food?
Yeah, what kind of?
Churches?
Ooh, yes, I do. Wear that.
I'm give me.
Yeah, you want some? Yeah, churches. It's churches.
Churches?
Churches chicken. Really? Okay, I'm gonna get that. I've never had it before.
What'd you get? Okay.
Those honey biscuits?
What'd you eat? Yo, you said the biscuits in here?
The biscuits.
They dry.
Also, make sure you get the spicy sprinkle for the chicken.
Yeah, I got
The spicy
the
sprinkle.
spicy 4-piece tenders.
No, the spicy sprinkle.
What's that?
It's like this little powder that you put on the chicken that when you combine
Bro, I was looking chicken.
I'm not trying to revise my order though. It's a lot of weight.
those are condiments, fam. You can literally just be like, give me spicy sprinkle and honey. Yes.
You're crazy.
Stop.
Yeah.
I just want to add a condiment.
Yeah, I got you.
That spicy sprinkle. Actually, can you put it in your order?
Yeah.
I was so excited for that smoothie too. I'm so pissed off.
It's
Fuck
okay,
those
sweetheart.
people.
Definitely because I'm slow.
I just want chicken wings.
They don't have like wings. You can get like
Well, I gotta get my shit ready, don't I?
tender. They have them
Well,
spicy.
you're not-
You can get it. But it's not like wings. Like it's not like tacos.
We are a strategic exclusion of the affirmatives, accessing the resolution, the performance of non-communicability, a way of thinking through the whole beginning from activity allows us to inhabit black and consciousness and rupture the structural science that produce and facilitate black and social physical modes as starting from the old as a non-communicable re-rendering of civil society's anti-black coherence, non-commutability is a technology of meaning, disruption, and making it vibe that it reveals a violent understanding of concepts like sovereignty and indigenous spontaneity. An example of this is the way of the non-communicability reveals the way that the black is simultaneously mobilized by the affirmative to speak in the name of blackness, but also papers over the heart of the issues affecting blackness and the violent forms of care and relationality that exist with the veil because of the affirmative strategy to do with black or native care must start with the structure of anti-blackness itself. Non-compatibility is a refusal of hope in the political register of their opacity. They are flight to fantasy in favor of thinking and acting from the world instead of attempting to include blackness or indigeneity into the fold of humanism. You should go negative to engage in non-communicability strategically, excluding the affirmative. Their new relationality is key for a mourning process that allows us black people to create a rallying points for effective resistance, which must start from the whole violence works through debate as well, which is not a neutral space but an active curriculum that structures our consciousness and how we relate to the world. What is said debate is material effect has the power to both disrupt the world and maintain depending on what is said, and which is the reason why the oldest key proven by schools like Louisville's Hampton and Pori that paved the way for the way that debate exists. Violent logics today non-compatibility is a process not only remembering those forms of debate but also creating different forms of relationality within debate and the world to challenge anti-blackness and provide care for current and future debates. So starts from the whole our performance of non-compatibility debate and strategically excluding the entirety of form as key. Social death is the impact filter for this debate. Their members are incoherent and their desire for inclusion in the archive and redress of the colonialism and the slave will still exist in a world post-affirmed because their description of the indigenous violence doesn't have an explanatory position for the antagonism that exists between blackness and the world. However, you starting from the position of black belts, that black lives is able to resolve the consumption of native people. Wilderness says black bodies have been deemed rapeable and expendable because they don't have agency. This means a focus on flesh and alienation of blackness is necessary to resolve on the grasping experimentation of indigenous others. It is proves the solving position of slavery is a prerequisite to cultivating any form of grammar by which to explain indigenous or anti-black forms of violence. The permutation. Group the permutations, they look at permutation and revolutionary and pre-revolutionary debate. This debate is a question of competing methodologies. What is should be a static artifact in competition with the one and see discourse allowing the judge to choose in context of the debate which methodology is better approach to resolving the affirmative and criticism that permits severance because in doing both there's departure from the theory of the affirmative which necessitates we departure from a theory of the alternative which necessitates we understand blackness only through that antagonism and understanding from the whole. It's an unconditional refusal to engage in any process of understanding it through nukes or indigeneity. Separate forms of report or one for moving target. They made all of them linked to the choice cost benefit analysis. Black archive development 2 it justifies that conditionality that is only stable. We're advocating the round letting to change our average choice debate, which is key to developing strategies of black hair and familial relationships. 3 proves competition only the way that we can win in no way. The only way they can win in no way is by getting rid of portion of the affirmative. Their discourse is parasitic on blackness. The problems of the world aren't the problem, rather the world is modernity survives based on the minor fixes of the system built upon black death. Their app is a mediocre ethics that is catastrophic black people races, creates forms of cruel optimism in which we're meant to look to a future that we can never reach either. The beliefs that they can create some form of hyper subjectification that allows us to transgress the way that kinship and through relationality exists now. The all is to start from the whole of the link that proves when it maintains a structure of bonds and we both continue to prove the perm was always a half measure couldn't solve links all decides the perm reason why the case competitive perm is a new link in a way. The permutation example by civil society trying to capture the one to see performance without actually doing. This is the worst form of colonialism. A bond strategy co-op the strategy the one to see is independent, reasonable, negative, and discursive active bonds against us in the same logic where the slave master steals the work of the slave and turns all of the affirmative. Wilson 3 and he's suggesting what it means to be a slave is subject kind of a complete appropriation. There's no relation to blackness outside of the terms of this not only a form of enslaved black property but also a form of free blacks. Not only is a slave performance, dance, music, etc. property white enjoyment, but so is the really belief slave enjoyment of the performance who belongs to white people. There's a struggle bus this adds to the permutation do the act and the alternative. Think of a bus on the road to resolve both the affirmative and the cave, they would get off before we were able to resolve forms of anti-blackness for the structuring reasons why and forms of indigenous violence exist. App creates worse forms of, they say non-relationality means our theory of non-relationality means we can't create forms of care. The app creates worse forms of care because our rule of slave cross-links where they're unable to, one, explain what kinship or familiarization the post-affirmative look like, and two, they're unable to explain why any of their attempts at examples into easy cross-links proves any different reason or any difference in the way the community built its relationships or forms of relationality and care existed prior. This means only the absence of resolved kinship and familiarization best because we begin with the old word blackness and was constructed as a foundational form of relationality where the slaves were constructed as a foundational form of relationality between white people and have said suture all forms of relationality exist. They have no explanation for why they're right angels or thinking through kinship via nukes and does anything for black people has the ability to explain why the violence of the plantation there are more toxic because they use things like the permutation provided grammar to explain blacks, which is not fit. There's accessibility to that. Their communities of flight and their king card. They're unnaming and renaming structures that situate the confines of relationality to the human have no reason. Of course, for the slave, their affirmatives king card assumes a form of relationality that doesn't exist for blackness, hypervisibility, which is simultaneously hyperfocus and the ignoring of the ontological condition of blackness. Simultaneously hypervisible and ignoring is the ontological condition of blackness means that we're not able to. With the visual signifiers over Kozak kind of comes to opaque.
We have 7:40. We'll take a starting out.
Hey, Peter. We'll go to the room. Let's see what we got. There's cool.
Oh, Carlos, I can come with y'all. It's fine if y'all leave at 10, right? It's fine if y'all leave at 10, right?
Yeah, we're leaving like 9:30, so 10.
Sounds fine? Okay.
As long as we don't leave
Okay. Okay.
From here.
From here? Okay.
Did you get this place anywhere?
I'm sorry. Did you get?
No, you said you were going to do it.
Oh my god, I'm sorry.
That's cool.
That slipped my mind.
Yeah,
Well, do you want anything?
From where?
Well, I had like drinks or a snack or something.
No, I really know the swings here. Both of you and Chaz. Okay. And then I'll go on a bash faster.
That should be the goal of everything.
Yeah, exactly. We fucked up here, so we gotta compensate for that. Huh?
We're the 33rd.
Yeah, so I was like, what the fuck? Next time, your speaker points are gonna be like there. In the firefight. Or the 33rd seat.
Yeah, but that means you're going to go in so hard at this point.
They're gonna work y'all out. The speaker points up.
Yeah, 0.1. Next time.
Yo, but think about how hard you're going to go into this thing.
That's what I'm saying.
Just think about it.
No way I was here for trash. I gotta do something before we do this.
What colors are these? Dependence on your skin.
Because after this round's over, we leave, and we can't get the day and hotels back
I'm
after
going to be here
that.
in 20 minutes. Just
I
go
looked into it this morning, I figured if we could get a day, but get the day in the hotel, we could leave, so, yeah, okay. Yeah, might as well stay. And also, it's just like, what time is it?
I was gonna be like, bitch.
Yeah, right, so this round ended at what, 2:30, 3 o'clock? We get back at, yeah, we get back at 4 o'clock in the morning. Huh?
I'm leaving that there.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine.
What y'all saying, going for what happened here, how they get my RV. One particular place. I honestly feel like Texas no point for me to do.
Oh, right.
I mean,
I'm still
outside,
telling you all
doing
that.
everything.
You said 9:30 tomorrow? I'll be with you.
Make sure you're down there with your stuff at 9:30.
I will.
That's what I'm telling everybody. Because we're gonna have to load up the van, and I want us to be rolling out of the
I'll
car.
go home too.
Yeah.
Are y'all gonna make like a half trip stop to eat and stuff?
What?
Are y'all gonna make like a half?
Oh, no, we'll stop. We'll stop.
Just wanted to about to pack up on snacks and stuff.
We'll stop. Like, we stop like 2 or 3 times along the way.
How long is the drive?
No.
It's like 9, 10 hours, depending on traffic. I've done it in 8. I've done it in 8.
It
I did
just,
it in 9.5 and coming here. It was so annoying.
One year when the traffic was good, I did.
so like, why did the big kids take so long then? Because they said
You
you
can during the snow.
And the
Yeah,
snow.
we actually got delayed on Friday because of the snow. We were supposed to leave much earlier and get here much earlier, but the whole city was shut down. Like campus was closed. Like none of the buildings were open. I was like, we're still down.
But it was like what, 5 inches you said?
Yeah, but they didn't prepare for it. And people were stuck in traffic for 6 hours. Like it took me 6 hours to get from campus to Elizabeth. 6 hours.
I can go check the whole Stay cool.
Oh, I needed to judge it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
They know they're missing.
I would. They will not start that. My computer won't be open until Carl sits down. So they
Yeah.
can start when we need 2 judges.
Straight down on everything. I'm doing it because and then straight down with it.
We're still also waiting for that.
Yeah.
I mean, he can't start without Carlos.
He's coming right back. He'll be-
Not the decision. That was really wild. I was like, also, I had a quick decision time. That was like giving people 5 to 10 minutes to answer. You know. Yeah, that was this year. Like, I heard people complain about it. They were like, I had 5 minutes to.
Yeah.
Only one.
Thank you.
Cool. So I'm gonna do like the case extension on top, and then case straight down, and then I'm gonna do the case straight down. Cool. Is everyone good? If we win the total election, restrict the executive authority of the president, you should conduct first nuclear strike against indigenous black communities. You should vote for them because they have disproven to impact on answer first use nuclear codes that we reproduce and radiated bonds that produce geographically. They have no explanation be as clear settlements, different control over time and space, produce the basis for ecological destruction, spiritual violence, and not yet. There's no fiat arguments we get away at two is independent solid when one is around activity, the affirmative conversation struggles outside of the family dynamics, key to produce moments of chaos out of black having normal dynamics, but also you said a co-constitute with the word around which is key to create moments of sociality and miss the balance of the necessary truth because you have to ask kind of live the pessimism true. B is hyper subjectification, rethinking the world via cosmological solutions necessary to intervene the alienation violence produces that specific foundation for capital property because Davis turned into a resource at the top the war arguments they don't answer merit. This is damning. This is turning the affirmative indicates that there's a fundamental misreading of ontology. They produce ontology to the logical non-provability because they don't ask what ontology is. This is a concession that their ontology claims are fundamentally false. Their response to them is claiming that this is not sufficient because it indicates that they are not simply a question of Hegel and dialectics regardless of what their ontological theorization of blackness dialectics or not. They misunderstood what ontology is. Their reading understands blackness through the ontology of the West is universalizing. This simply reifies the void of relationality. The heart of blackness turns all of their opacity care arguments failure to answer morality evidence turns the entirety of the negative at a theoretical level because we realize one specific word ontology is the negative arguments presume universalization of ontology in order to become a clear merit evidence in case they're wrong about ontology functions when you merit evidence means negative theory is wrong about how violence even functions. The next argument is the randomization argument across whole this is a point of evidence that can be proof of the way in which they inevitably move people into coherence, which is a form of violence, but they will flinch the more trouble evidence. This is our argument that MSS queer kinship relations fall prey capitalism because they see a lot of normative markets for families such as house father or sister. They are not only level of positive care is dangerous conceded. Two general links. One is the absence is not solely positive earthquakes are destructive and positive. B is the affirmative is disorientation of kinship away from the human, which solves the C the permutation results. It also merit impact turns this argument the criticism. At the top, there is a concession that opacity is not violent or disruptive. In fact, that there is a necessity for the human to gaze upon the opaque because it creates generative for the human to gaze, and that is constructive. They have considered the argument that the human enjoys both the disruption, but also because it is generative for them means that their strategic opacity or strategic negligence is one that does not solve any of the criticism. Means you can vote affirmative because it just simply outweighs. The next argument is the first evidence. One, this contradicts only relies upon the merit evidence. Two, they have conceded the argument that the native is fundamentally impossible to be recognized. It's always already skipped over this other imagined means it can't be having. Third, this is just a historical claim about student movements that are just going to be answered only now by the protector protest argument to determine the state personality. So you the coherence that you create and flinching on top of the romanticization just had other inscribing the inevitable claims of fairness on the permutation or the pathologization of people into the moments of care. The reading of the wilderness evidence is also a moment of the study of the negligence. Look at specific historical examples to do that buys back into the same logics. You determine a grammar of coherency that is based upon this. Mood evidence is also an example of the aesthetics of blackness that can be studied as moments that allow us to understand how blackness functions. Is all the same argument. Rather, your argument is that you pathologize people who care, which turns the metropolis argument about how we pathologize people who don't want the land. Our argument is that we don't pathologize either way, but that you create a particular demand that people operate in one way that ignores how people get forced into coherence. The state negligence is one. There's no link to this. You have conceded the argument that indigeneity is fundamentally unknowable either way. Suppression is not respectable, which means this is the claim. His argument two is that you also do this. The wilderness evidence is an argument of how you engage in certain knowledge. So is the moon's aesthetic argument. Three is the Marriott turns this argument for returning the crackdown argument. The opacity is one that leads the people to be generative for the human, creates the crackdown, creates the very incoherent grammar is what supports humanism. Two is the call to the resolution. One, the permutation solves the bro evidence says that red and black theorizing needs to happen. It's a solvency advocate for perm to both. Two, there's no link to sovereignty, which is what all this card is in. Three, you use contingency. The arguments about specific moments in the debate, the mood evidence I've already done this list of bars, all contingent moments as well. For the Marriott turns this argument also you poison relationality through the pathologization of those who come here. The Ting argument does not assume a ruse of analogy. Our argument is that blackness and nativeness are not fundamentally the same, but rather that self-closed man and blackness are co-constitutive what creates the world, which is a necessary analytic that both our King evidence and your bro evidence supports. Our argument is that understanding this is particularly necessary about the nuances and textual differences of the Black Landed Project, and it is that black people have a different relationship to the land, but that is argument above your papers over specificity and forces people into this type of violence, which is the argument that you have considered is that non-communicability is fundamentally good for the human. It enjoys speculating upon its destruction as well as its a possibility is generative for because it allows it to ponder on the moments that is proven in both the postmodernism paintings example of Jacobs, but also you should look at the way in which black people enjoy studying the impossibility of knowing blackness because it is generative for their academic careers. The next argument debate can DJ makes the argument that debate can disrupt the world, which is the impact turn to the bro, which contradicts the bro evidence and says there's no moment there. The next argument here is the permutation proper. The permutation one, you should allow competing methods. It's the only way the bro evidence supports this argument. It says not doing this actually means a flight away from anti-blackness, which is an internal link turn. Also, it's not severance. We're not severing any part of the affirmative. You have conceded the framing that Jacob begins that you should not allow 80s policy jargon to frame your understanding of the permutation, but rather ask whether or not they are indicative of the same arguments. This is not cruel optimism because our argument is that spirituality is inevitable. You have conceded this argument is not stealing either because our argument is that it does not take any part of your project. This is they are not incompatible. This is a basic theory argument, which is not a taking of your labor, the struggle, but it says we're not going for the paramount, whatever thing. This also is not a residual offense for them because it's taken out by the bro evidence, the worst case of care. We've already impacted this above. The nukes argument is explained above. We need the specificity of nukes because it allows us to understand ontology.
Should be so funny. I don't know if you should have finished. What time are decisions due? Because they post decisions.
Like Tuesday. Oh shit, did you fuck up my shit?
Did I?
No, it's still going.
Okay. Willie. It's okay.
What? Oh my god.
This is what they're doing in half an hour.
See, this is why I get abused. You saw that, right?
I didn't actually. I legit didn't.
He stole.
No, you hit a block on
He hit? Oh shit.
I know. I said I hit. Wait, who's on the panel?
I don't know any time you're in race.
Huh?
Oh.
Oh, that's not good. Well, actually, that is good for him. It's good. That's like...
Isn't he like a salty or something? With a little skinny,
Yeah, he's a little
light
skinny
skin?
boy. He's a junior. That panel's actually good for his neck. Because none of those people talk with stupid theory. He's jazzing the last week for 2 years now.
It is 2 months. That's what I said.
conceded theory argument and a whole bunch of leaks and expect to win this debate. We will win the criticism outweighs the turns the case for a couple reasons. The first is the purchase of evidence that goes conceded coming out of the 1 yard says that the state and the academy control the direction of violence, which means if we win a link to the way we see affirmative, creates a certain coherency within the academy, means they can't solve the impacts of the app because the first evidence is that state and capital maps the ability for us to create coherent spaces of the mass in order to create new spaces for the anti-black and indigenous violence that do the same thing as the affirmative means they find new spaces of care, etc. and look those spaces the same they did at the top of the 1AC. It appears that they can't solve any of the affirmative because they're necessitating coherence and the academy is able to map out and use of the state to remobilize the same things, i.e. externally non-unique state of their solvency claims that means that we would link argument they lose this debate that I'm gonna start on the permutation. You can't drop the 7 as a fucking voter and expect to win this debate. It's a reason why you meet the entirety of the negative strategy means that you destroy strategy because you ultimately make it impossible for us to make. That means if I want a 100% link differential between the app and the alternative, they conceded a fucking voter. That means they fundamentally use because they made this debate unfair for us to debate in the first place. It means that we can't access things like athletic referee rep debates because it makes it impossible for us to do things like propose alternatives without being consumed by things like the affirmative because they will also always say blanket things like black red theorizing good, which is their only articulation for why the permutation is good in the first place. It appears that there's no actual articulation of us having in-depth debates about education and shit like that, regardless because they ultimately are able to say that they can subsume any criticism towards the app. Don't need to spend any more time on this all longer because the only reason Nico says it's not a voter is to say that it's a power that is encapsulated about their theoretical arguments made on the case law, but it's not. This isn't an argument about your theory of power, rather the ability for us to have debates in the first place. What does it look like for us to forge competition space for a black people? If you always bar us out to things like the permutation, etc., which is the exact call to order that we'll be going for on the link debate. Now I'll start here. All links are disassed to the conceptually all links are disassed because they prove the difference between the app and the 7 argument and pass that out. Cool. First, the professionalization is that the Mendon-Hardy evidence says their study of the negligent ultimately professionalizes that very same negligent makes it a tool of the academy. The Mendon evidence says that your articulation of precious as someone that had a beautiful relationality with their friends is a co-optation of that in order to create a critical academic that's recognizable by people like good judges, etc. And the people in the room, we said that acknowledgeability always creates a standard for coherency that makes it impossible for you to operate here in the real world, i.e. what happens to those that cannot cohere their demand for care, that cannot cohere the types of things that they go through in the first place. All proves that your form of care necessitates a professionalized engagement with the academy that makes it legible to other people. It means that your model of care necessitates a form of vulnerability that you force onto black people, which means that you link back, you cause the impact of the Bro evidence, which is the second I'm going to go for. The Bro evidence says that, which is the sovereign loss, it says the way you articulate the relationality between black and indigenous people is fundamentally bankrupt and ultimately fucked up. It says that the way in which you understand things like your bird reading evidence of the King evidence is a framing argument that you make in order to misconstrue the ways in which black rationality operates, i.e. you've conceded that King's fucking article is about how black people can relate to each other, not about black and natives. This is the article that she didn't write about black and natives explicitly to talk about the difference between black relationality and others, which is why you ultimately cohered that around the possibility of native black relations, which our Bro evidence says the possibility of bringing black incoherency to coherency is the mutual exclusivity between the alternative and the affirmative. It ultimately says that you destroy the ability for us to make ties and coalitions when there's no solvency for the app and nobody's speaking, get back to things like the Black Land Project, etc., which gets rid of the remaining 1 AR office. It also says that this ultimately creates a form of anti-black violence so from natives towards black activities because it always says that we can speak in the same terms. They've conceded that it's also linked to the 2AC articulation of what a fugitive is and how that's conceptualized via the plantation proves that they are always already using and co-opting black language in order to create a condition of possibility for natives. Now we will say the alternative is the non-communicability, the rejection of the affirmative in favor of strategic exclusion is the ability for us to wallow in the whole legislation to know that whether or not I'm able to articulate to you what that specifically look like doesn't matter because we know that when I see you outside this round, Willie, Carlos, Barlow, we all know what the fuck is going on, that the ability for us to care for each other outside, the ability for us to communicate that care is something that goes beyond the types of protocols that they're deciding to. It's not something I ever have to articulate. I've gone up to Willie multiple times and never been able to articulate what is wrong, but Willie has been there. Why? Because there's a certain incoherency. The black care is self-charming argument says isn't that better because of all the arguments I've done above? Dude, what's the line? They say the human enjoys opacity, one to warn our example, which means there's no reason to actually give new warns or example to help give them extra extrapolation. Also, we will still win that even if the human enjoys opacity, we will win that you cause a more internalized breakdown, which means there's only a risk that the alternative solves better, which I've done above in the Bro evidence that the native can't be recognized, but you make them recognizable. That is a claim about the status quo, but they don't have a warrant for why that's always inevitable. We have a reason why we talk about just making relationality not communicable. They say the Wilderson is a grammar of coherency, but A, not going for any of the Wilderson analysis. B, it doesn't alter any of our stuff because Wilderson is saying that those studies of blackness always fail to create coherent grammar because it's fundamentally impossible. They say that we pathologize people that care, but no, we pathologize the way you attempt to script those people that care into the academy in the way which you studied them, why that process fundamentally fucked up, i.e. how we have a critique of the relationality that precious has to her friends, rather the way you attempt to cohere that around the relationality between natives and black people. They say that the Marriott evidence tries to crack down one. It doesn't say anything about capacity two. It says that black people have the desire to always make their suffering the worst, which isn't any of the arguments that we've made. We said that you cause your ass impacts to happen again, which means it's not a link to any of our theory that we've gone for. With the furthest evidence, this is the Barlow argument, is a permutation argument, but this is the link to the Barlow evidence that's saying things like black man theorizing writ large is good, is exactly how you professionalize the types of academic study that bro is doing on you, is spilling tea on your shit. She says that the way in which you understand things like black man theorizing is fundamentally bankrupt, which I've done link out analysis above. They said that we poison relationality, there's no link to this. I did it above. They said that the king evidence is about is co-constitutive with the rest of the stuff that she's written, but why did she write a particular article about black relationality? She wanted to go for the arguments that you are going for. They said that the Black Land Project, I'm not sure why it's responsive to anything that we occupy. It only feeds back into the professionalization argument that I made on the moon evidence. They said that we do protocols, no argument or no, and there's no warrant or example of this. Second of all, even if we do, it's a reason why non-communicability is net better, reason why we shouldn't have debated in the first place. They said that we make Native people's desire to protocol, but no, we don't. There's no warrant for this. They say we force people into specificity that non-communicability is bad because black people enjoy studying impossibility. I don't know why black people enjoying studying impossibility is a reason why we double turn ourselves or means anything. People enjoying things isn't the link. It's just the way that you create bad things.
Okay, we have 2d6 to get started now. Yeah.
My energy is very low.
So high.
I'm really, really tired. I actually wanted that.
Energy sounded quick.
Yeah, it did.
I never
Now you
had-
were bouncing back and forth.
I never had to Yeah. And my balance is actually most exhausting I've ever put in my life.
Are you ill?
Just 2 days ago. 2 days.
You don't know. You don't know. About that stuff.
You're doing a great job. I'm proud of you. He was 5 minutes away.
Hey, let's check in. Go. I'm gonna record.
I know. I think Christian is 5 minutes away.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
4 minutes. RC will be here in 4 minutes and then he's on next one.
Yeah, how famous is this guy?
I also.
He's not famous.
He's just really, really.
She's just really great.
Like old money?
No, like, not like new money. Like grinding. He's like the CEO of the bank or some shit. That sugar daddy money.
His mom is having there, she just like,
That's all.
That's the CEO of the bank. Like, yo,
You
what?
know this.
Man, whatever you want.
Go, baby.
Whatever you want. But it's not work, man. Go on vacation all y'all.
yeah, do it in the future. Is he the only child?
No, he's got a sister.
She's a younger sister, right? She's a younger sister. That's what I've heard. Like DJ in high school or DJ in college?
Just DJ. No, this is Fizz. Oh, awesome. Thank you. This DJ's not good.
This stuff? Yeah. There's gonna be cases like that. alternative? Case, it's conceded there's nothing in the 2R that says we don't get away the affirmative. They're only going for a turns case argument. You have also conceded there's an impact turn to the app that's not clear, which massively outweighs the majority of the arguments. You have conceded the solvency mechanism of hypersubjugation, thinking nature as agentic disarticulates capitalism. The subject operation, the impact of this is the explicit clear impact of the process of settlement vis-a-vis capital, which is the argument of disarticulating subject object. This structure, so university argument considered internally compliant is co-opted as capitalist, and you have conceded the impact of this is massive ecological destruction. The which is necessary to think of the plain text. The second argument is that the fiat argument you have conceded this is necessarily to solve the first strike, which are two internally guarded, which means you have to win a large-scale turns case that's 100% risk because there's very little external offense in the turn, which means you should go for the case. You can't start the tuner with incoherence good and then make the argument that fair debate's good, that debate is valuable because it causes revolution on revolution. This is the point of our permutation arguments, which you can frame the majority of the debate through the permutation because I think it solidifies our offense, but also their link arguments. The first is what will couch fundamentally as an inversion of power structure. The alternative is refusal of all ordered incoherence only inverts the system of legibility. That pathologization becomes fundamentally inevitable insofar as they pathologize those people who are forced into zones of coherency. There are multiple examples that were dropped from the wire. First is the romanticization argument case once they trope the spirituality. The one I see as a romantic one. Nico impacts this argument. The one error says that it sociogenically produces the name as intangible, which proves they are invested. But B, there are multiple examples when they did it to themselves. The example appeals to fairness. Ferguson's genealogical projects, BJ's reference to violence within slavery, the attempt to cohere microaggressions alongside ontology. This magnifies our internal link to this impact because it creates the worst forms of cynicism where they can think they've escaped coherence while pathologizing people who presume they haven't. This means that permutation is necessary for a few reasons. First, it intervenes and says the concepts of coherence and incoherence are theoretically lacking at the level of kinship or sociality because they're simultaneously both positive and negative. Your argument that abstract refusal all positive, and that means you invert. This solves their professionalization argument because it's not an abstract move toward professionalization, but also implicates our Marriott argument, which you have conceded the afropessimistic move that you cannot separate your mode of politics creates a transcendentalization of suffering that must attack anything that disproves this argument, which is the pathologization argument. The opacity argument is also a net benefit to it. They have conceded the warrants. You can't just say there's no warrants when you have conceded. The alternative does not solve it. Recuperates the human cell locally. So, for example, relies upon the not saying and not knowing to provide lines of refusal to study proven and tenures, voted tenure, check job, in white, old white professional turns it came the native bias in the project, the academy from academic theorizing to motion postmodern paintings like the inconsequential black light. You can think about this the way in which the literal Smithsonian will have slave quotes where white people ponder what the strategic exclusion or what the lack there of meaning or non-communicability, which means the only solvency argument they have maybe an inroad to is the care arguments, which means if we win our dissent to the care arguments of permutation or solstice because their only answer is sovereignty arguments, the inevitability of studying the categories and other lecture arguments about the coherency, the inevitable, their pathologization of those who are coherent that produces the intra-community violence, produces a cruel optimism that attempts to escape the outside. Their only theoretical response to that permutation is severance. Versus they have not extended a fucking link argument to severance. They have conceded the multiple one arguments that permutation both includes the entirety of the affirmative, the way in which we understand kinship structure, but we understand it's not just positive or negative, which solves the majority of the arguments. There's not a judge take argument in the 2R, which means you have to evaluate the permutation versus the alternative. It solves the majority of the arguments. We don't destroy clash debates or any context of revolution versus revolution. You just have to prove mutual exclusivity. There was not an extension of no permutations in K debates, which solves your arguments. I'm going to answer the link arguments now. First is the professionalization argument. If we win any risk of our inversion argument, that means they pathologize the care that is forced into coherence, which means all your arguments about Willisonianness are offense for us. We don't create a recognizability that someone must always be coherent, but understand that it might be an inevitable part of existence that has to be grappled with the entire thing, thesis link argument. There's no explanation of how they solved it. How does he study in the whole, the intracommunal care arguments, which answer a little below the pro evidence and the fugitivity link arguments. First, there's a few responses. Mirror evidence, Root's analogy depends on the ontologization of particular transcendental grammar or suffering. Nervous says this is fundamentally false. It applies a Fanonian reading more in line with the affirmative's understanding of relationality. This means that theoretical link arguments make sense. Conceded the one error since times explaining these arguments. Nico indicates how natives and slaves work together as fugitives and how there was even slavery in the Americas. Natives were fleeing from slave citizens in Latin America. The point is that fugitivity is the same, which would link to their arguments, but rather natives engaged in a form of fugitivity and nuclear prevents incorporation. It's also a claim about structural power that produces fugitivity. The question of whether or not the conceptualization, this is all the misrecognition arguments, the alternative has no communicability. Two arguments here. First is the permutation results, and the majority of their arguments about black hair, the relationship that Nate has with Willie is not offense versus us, but that proves that the way in which they frame it as non-communicability. And then posit in a dialectical opposition to coherence means those that are forced to perform coherency or link argument. Also, no explanation how it solves any of our subject-object arguments, which means you solve that vote affirmative,
nasty argument. The only argument they have is to say that there was no warrant for argument, but there are majority of the arguments that were argument about the concepts of Wildersonians. Any flinch that they do should prove our permutation, because all their articulations about what coherence is just a call to order, an explanation of the negligence. They have described the affirmative as a study of negligence, which the cross-sex of the 2NC was literally just that anyone not outside the university. There are so many fucking examples of this in the 2NC that prove that their hardline stance that only goes for coherence becomes dangerous insofar as it inverts the same ontological power structure. This is why we do not say natives occupy the spiritual understanding or the relationships that King articulates, but that King is an internal link argument that are disassociating kinship from family structures. Our argument is not that King is descriptive of black and native relationships, but instead that the affirmative's articulation about kinship works as a cosmological facticity is in line with King's theorization. The award for this is the Roe evidence, which does not say we're moved towards sovereignty, but says that black red theorizing alongside of similar structural systems that produce power or difference, which means it's necessary to theorize the way in which the structure produces both, which is the argument about coherency and often a situation that they don't have an answer to.
Anybody need like hard knocks or
That was good. Who all ordered? I ordered a diet something because I was trying to soda. That's Diet Coke. I feel like what drink did you get?
Sprite.
Check. I think that's Sprite, but double check.
Pretty sure.
That's true one? Yeah. That's Coke. Yeah. You want your food?
That's mine.
Who got the happy now?
Oh, I didn't have that.
Who got the happy now?
Oh, I don't, oh, me.
Oh, we got another happy now. Who got, did we all just get spicy dark meat?
I got this. I don't know if I got dark meat or
Yes,
not.
I
It's
did.
got
Did you have
a
it?
4-piece tenders.
Did you pay extra for
No.
whites?
So I'll probably dish it through.
Alright, check if those are tenders. Because you, oh, you got tenders. Yeah, check if those are tenders. If not, get that. Who else got happy now?
Yeah.
You got happy now?
Yes.
What did Krishna do?
I didn't.
You didn't like you did with us earlier? I had to go scout you for a fucking order.
These are tenders.
I got it.
Like you can't be throwing shade.
You got tenders?
Oh wait, let me see. Does it come with a biscuit?
This is a biscuit. Wait, are those spicy?
Yes.
Those are spicy?
Yeah.
You ordered spicy. You did.
Yes.
They're not in your thing?
Mac and cheese.
Wait, the tenders for mac and cheese? I know I ordered a mac and cheese and a
Biscuit tenders. This is biscuit tenders. You didn't get spicy.
Right
now. Yeah.
I don't think I got it.
This is your biscuit?
I mean, what's that?
Mac and cheese. Man, we got a lot of sauce. What sauce did you want?
I had honey mustard.
What?
Honey mustard.
What's yours?
What was the sauce you wanted?
Oh, I forgot what it's called.
I also
Spicy,
got mac and cheese.
spicy drizzle or some shit.
Hot sauce.
It should be a biscuit.
Oh, do you think so?
Yeah.
What, that's what?
Two biscuits.
Is that it? That's
Yeah.
You want one?
I'm
Yeah.
happy to.
Yeah. You got a biscuit. You're about to sue. Yeah. I also get a fork.
Fork.
Who don't got a biscuit?
I have a biscuit for me.
Oh wait, I couldn't do it. Maybe I did.
I'm just trying to.
Someone took your mashed potatoes.
You got a biscuit?
How would you do?
What? I
Also,
don't.
anyone's wrong.
Wait, this is not.
If there's either person is-
You can take it. You can take it. I don't want to see this yet. I don't like seeing this yet. Who the fuck ordered 3 jalapenos in a bag?
Orders what?
3 jalapenos.
That's probably DJ.
Like it's just jalapenos.
Not bad.
DJ didn't take his fries.
He took my mashed potatoes.
Yeah, you can take his fries. If you took your mashed potatoes, we don't know.
I don't know if he did actually, so just leave it there. Are you recording the RFD too?
Yeah. Okay, iPhone.
Are you pausing the video?
So interesting because the team that was just in I feel like the trick to that is that it's just so complicated that you just explain whatever way you want.
Bitch, I hit stop.
I hate eating the fries. I love their
Why'd you order fries?
because they didn't let me choose.
You can pick.
They didn't let me.
Where are you from? You're from Oklahoma.
I definitely.
You should.
Okay. Alright, I thought this debate was kind of messy. I actually thought I was voting app after the 2AR until I looked at the flow. And I think I ended up voting neg just because of a lack of 2AR offense and depth and specificity. And the 2 and R closed the door just enough that I think I vote neg on certain things. For example, I think a lot of the 2AR is late breaking to the specificity of their link offense and also impact calc. The 2NC, 2 and R has arguments that say that they internal link train your solvency for both your app impact, which is your argument about pollution, and land agency, because the caveat would just pollute it again in the future and recreate subject-object divide. And they also have an impact argument about internal link training your care, which means I don't think they have to win ontology framing, which is a flag 2 in our argument that 2AR doesn't have a supposed answer to. That means functionally, if I think that they win a link, it functionally internal link turns the app and or mitigates your solvency to the point where a risk of a negative that outweighs whatever you do solve. But this is definitely not clean by any means, because I think there's some, like, I come pretty close to putting app on, like, Marriott is kind of conceded. The 2NR, like, has, like, 2 sentences on it, but the 2AR does not sit on it enough that I'm, like, comfortable with it. There's other parts that I also think the neg is just not quite answering that kind of also make me pause. Like, does the neg link to the call to order? Does romanticization happen? Is coherence forced by the neg? I end up resolving the last question in a way that I think benefits the neg a lot more than the app, which may be me reading into the debate, but I have no idea how to resolve this outside of either team really telling me why the neg is coherence always bad and the app is always opacity bad. For example, the 2NC text that I have where they describe their romanticization or their arguments about coherency. I don't know why that means that they have to defend coherency good in every, or non-coherency good in every instance, rather that enforce coherency is bad. And the text of the 2NC and 2NR and alt is strategic exclusion that we don't have to explain to each other, which means, like, I don't know why they have to defend coherency is, like, necessarily bad in every single instance, rather that strategically the way the app is done is bad. And I read that through the link debate, where I don't think the 2AR, the app has a specific answer to the king explanation until the 2AR, which is too late for me, because there's just not a 1AR on it.
That's what king thing you're referring to?
There's a 1AR answer to the sovereign loss dissed when they say that you reappropriate this king article to describe native black relationships. And the 1AR answer, as the text that I have it, is basically like, there's textures to violence, but we have to understand them as both constituent of the world, which is not specific to the 2AR's explanation of you reappropriated this article. The 2AR is pretty good on it, but it's kind of brand new. So there is a link, and that complicates the term. I also think there's a risk of the link with the professionalization they said, that you just never say precious. They have specific links about the way you take a particular model of a black woman in the app and then hold up that model to crowd out other non-coherent forms of relationality, which means if I read the specificity of their links through their org set or through my reading of their calls, which is they don't have to defend coherence always bad, it's just like a risk of a linear case turn, and you don't solve it. So I don't know why this one didn't go for contractualism. I think it's really good.
Yes. I mean, a lot along the lines of Rooney in terms of my decision. A couple of things that brought me pause. I think that some of the language given, like the negative, is extremely powerful. I think a particular moment in terms of the permutation debate, which is that if the perm was kind of one of those do the act and do the neg, we would stop at doing the act because the act would assume that the world has been resolved because we have dealt with the crisis of indigeneity, which doesn't deal with the ways in which the kind of texture of anti-black violence does produce itself, it does happen. I think this argument can be even strengthened more so with this notion of the ways in which they kind of congeal themselves to blackness. This is the kind of criticism of precious. I don't hear the word precious, or I don't hear the name precious in the 2AR at all. I think that Nate spends a significant time talking about how you kind of reinforce that fungibility, which means that anti-blackness will always be in tension with indigeneity, because the focus of it is either one, a focus on a relation to land and how we relate to the land, which for black people is problematic. Another good moment in the 1AC, which is I don't think the niggas should have to go back and look at the lynching tree. I think that's also a powerful rhetoric justification for why we don't have that same ability to have a relationship with the land specifically, because the land has been utilized in the process of anti-blackness to make us the outside, which is their Marriott evidence, right? Which I think, one, I'm not sure why the Marriott evidence is a unique dissat to the affirmative, to the negative. I don't know if it's a dissat to the alternative or it's a justification for why the criticism of the negative or the theory of the negative is incorrect directly. I think that if anything, although there's no work done here, I'm not sure what the direct implication of the negative in relation to the Marriott evidence is. Where on the other side, I think that you are uncovering this Ferguson evidence, and I think it gives a lot of light to this coherency evidence, which is that it is an attempt to cohere one's identity category to the notion of the academy without addressing the larger concerns of how the state has used the academy as a platform for producing movements or producing solutions for said movements. I think it kind of fits into a problem-solution paradigm that, one, I think does challenge the ontology debate. Even though this argument is not made, I think you can make said argument, and it does challenge the ontology debate because it requires some consistency in the ways in which our movement happened, and that predictability in itself then is what allows us to produce coherency, even if the relationality is not understood, the particular identity is understood, and the identity is then used as a way to kind of oversert everything else about what it means to be indigenous, what it means to be black, and what it means to be probably a combination of those two things.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I'm interested in what you just said because I've been thinking about kind of the relationship between critique and care, and how really often critique prevents care for each other, and was thinking about that as a potential internal takeout, but it seems difficult given the nature of our contractual.
I think it's difficult, but I think the work here is done. I think that minus the contractual argument, you kind of lose a lot of the offense from that level of the debate. But I think that they're winning this larger risk that your theorization would prioritize the theory and the academy over the actual relationship that is produced. This is kind of like May's overstanding of the reason why there is no coherency, while at the same time there is particular coherency in a relationship between me, Barlow, and Carlos and May, right? Is because there's a different way in which you relate to people, and there's a different way in which you kind of theorize about that relationship with people, which is then furthermore the kind of juxtaposition of the King evidence itself, that you have used this in order to create tension between any theory that they will produce on the negative, right? In order for you to kind of ascribe to how you have a relationship with blackness, but then you can never say her name. Right. I think that this then speaks to the level of we produce coherency for indigenous movements. It doesn't truly deal with the textures of anti-blackness, because it does not truly deal with the texture of anti-blackness. I don't give you the ontology debate because I think that in order for you to win the ontology debate, given your bird evidence, you need to also deal with anti-blackness. I think they win any risk that the affirmative would produce more anti-blackness given coherency, or given the kind of erasure or utilization of black people produces that fungibility and that violence. Furthermore, I think in terms of the bro evidence, I think that you meet one of the two standards in order to not be anti-black. I think if y'all kind of focus on that, this is done well in the block. This is not in the 2 and R. Focus more so on like the other two areas. The other two areas being one, this coherency debate, which I think is okay, but more so this notion of enfolding the settler. This is kind of like what the Ferguson evidence I think gets to, but I don't think it has the same language of kind of like this enfolding the settler or the ability for us to then relate to the settler. I think that there's a lot more that needs to be done in order to deal with the particular violence, which gets me back to the lynching tree, how to resolve the violence that happens on the land, which for me think about like, oh, thank you, which for me thinks about, cool, I'm okay. Michael Barlow was talking about magic and shit, so we good. Yeah, so,
I'm not fucking.
Well, it's not one of those motions.
I don't think
it's not a motion, somebody lean on lights.
I think the power went
You
out.
don't think anybody's
lights right down the wall.
Because my computer isn't charging anymore.
I'm charging still.
Okay, then my break went out. But
This is
Well, are there
funny.
lights outside the room?
Yeah, charge that.
This isn't the first time this.
What are the lights on the wall? I can't believe. There you go.
Oh, look like
Where's the timer? Yeah. Where was I at? Oh yeah, bring me back to lynching tree, and it kind of like is those scenes of like subjugation, those scenes of violence that we don't want to return to. Kind of then sends me down the path of thinking about like Toni Morrison when writing Beloved, talking about how like they refuse to return to the kind of like the pasture in which that violence happens. She refused to return to like the field in which Baby Suggs did like all of her like preaching and stuff like that. So like the inability for us to have a particular relationship with the land because that relationship is already tarnished by the ways in which that land has already been categorized or positioned to us makes it impossible for us to ever want to deal with the question of the land, one, and two, what the settlers have done in order to make us have this like distinct relationship with the land. In all honesty, I think also there's some like offensive and permutation debate that could have also just have been easier for me to justify why the negative over the affirmative, because I think that you're winning a large risk that there's a dissat to the affirmative. But I think that though, and this is where I almost vote, is I think that you prove that they can't access one impact, but I don't think you talk about the second level or second layer of the impact directly, which I think is where probably other people have voted on. But I think that there are risks that the affirmative would produce coherency means that if anything, it doesn't do anything to resolve genocide, but instead folds into the same system that would produce that same genocide. And furthermore, is that because of like the dependency on blackness as a nature in order to push their theorization, for me, gives me pause on whether or not they can actually resolve anti-blackness given their bird evidence.
I'll go next. I was actually super attracted to the lynching tree argument. I just don't think it was in the 2 and R. I actually gave Marriott a lot more weight. I think the concession of it complicates your ability to win, what I think is a strong link argument. What Willie is describing with the argument about Precious and the King argument. Two of the things I think is in the 2AR from the Marriott evidence is A, the absolutist understanding of blackness as an ultimate dereliction is itself wrong because of the different experiential questions that manifest themselves in a material way, and B, your theorization from such a point is a form of coherence as an experiential question. I think that you're correct in the context of the King evidence. I went back and read it. I think they actually do a much better job of answering this in the specific examples that they've given, but the basis of that argument assumes that you want an ontologically exceptional understanding of blackness, or one that cannot be compared to or in relationship to any other form of experience, which I think Marriott has said A is incorrect and B is a violent form of theorization. Since I think Marriott means you haven't done that, I ultimately think that permutation as an incoherent disassemblage of settlerism and anti-blackness is compatible with your call to wait in the hold. It's just a different form of that theorization. I think the app has consistently been like we're a form of positive and negative theorization of what it means to be a part of the land. I think an easy way to get my ballot here is to like just make your arguments a lot smaller and just be what Willie is saying, right? Like, Black people have a violent history in relationship to the land, i.e. the lynching tree, which I think is a good ethos moment in the truancy, and just be like, we refuse that. We should not be called to cohere or understand our positionality in relationship to that. The end. I think that when we start throwing in a bunch of other stuff that allows them to complicate a lot of stuff, right? Because the 2 and R is just time pressured, I think. And I think that's why we don't deal with the Marriott shit as much, and I don't think we get into that. I think that there's a couple things I end up looking at. First is the professionalization link. I do think that your calls to stuff like severance means that we can't debate them, or what they say, your conflation of the 1AC, your romanticization of that, are all calls of coherence. I think that they say that, or it would complicate your cause to say that this is mythology. I also look to the Bro article itself in an attempt to like, well, maybe I can just vote on a their form of violence. I think that, like Willie says, you allow them to like sneak through a lot of the cracks because, right, I think Taylor's right in a couple of contexts. I wrote down a couple notes that says like you have to speak in the register of incoherence, which means engaging conceptually and argumentatively with black people. The negative is like, or the app is like, we have done that through these types of ways. And then it also says like, such work under-theorizes blackness, and they use that to say that, look, this is our theory of the two, that we're not a comparison, but we say that there are histories that inform the way that structures of violence come to exist. They impact us different, those textures are different, but our politics is one that, destabilizes that through land. So I guess I'm rambling now, but in short, I think that the concession of Marriott problematizes your ability to weaponize the kingdom.
Okay, I'll go next. I largely agree with what has already been said, but I do think that there's a problem with the 2NR strategy, particularly on the permutation. I thought it wasn't smart to just go for the severance argument, the impact level of it, without like a particular like link argument or framing of mutual exclusivity and framing the 2NR around that, because you essentially give them the ability, a doorway to articulate many different ways in which the permutation could potentially subsume the links in the 2AR because you're not doing the link debate on the permutation. Like for example, one of the 2AR's framing arguments that's made in the 2AR is that there's no judge cake argument, it's just the alternative versus the permutation. So your links, even if they are in the context of the affirmative, are slightly disconnected from their discussion of the permutation. I also feel like not going to the case page in the 2NR was a mistake, considering that that's where a lot of the affirmatives like offense they use in the critique debate comes from, particularly this hyper-subjectivity argument that they're making, like these external impact, where they say like that's the 1AR makes this claim about how that's the foundation of the epistemology of capitalism, and then goes in the 2AR and uses that as internal link defense against your impacts of co-optation and self-care, black care. And I think that in a world, I probably vote negative in a world where the affirmative is merely just reproduce care, because I think that you're ahead on that debate. But I think it's problematic in a world where they're making uniqueness argument being like, there's a second level to this debate where there are people that are forced into zones of intelligibility, and that because of that, a lot of your impacts are non-unique in the specificity of what the affirmative is talking about, which is the justification that they ultimately use. That, granted, it's a little late breaking, but there's some of it, I think the description argument in the 1AR that Nico is making, that is like, we need this in order to create descriptions, and the 2AR's explanation of that is that those descriptions are necessary in order to resolve the specificity of the affirmative.
Can I say how I resolve that debate? I think the analysis of Tiffany King stuff is where I resolve that debate, and the whole idea is that like we can have these subjects, we can bring these kind of like these particular traumas and violence.
You don't have to defend ontological anti-blackness, none of that shit. Just be like, niggas have a bad history with the language, you force us into that, kiss my ass, right? Like, I don't know what their answer is.
I agree that we shouldn't have gone like Red Onion.
I thought that I thought that was gonna be the 2 and I was like, they're gonna make it in 30 seconds. Yeah. I don't know what the answer is to that. Like, the land is bad for niggas.
Who was that? Oh yeah, I also think that, I already said that.
Kozak.
Oh, one other advice I would have for the negative is that I think you need to unpack the link threshold in this debate, like specifically why like a 1% risk of a link generates mutual exclusivity and turns the entirety of the app, including their post-fiat type arguments they're trying to weigh against the affirmative, because you just make an assertion in this debate that like 1% risk means you vote negative, but there's never like a top level framing of that argument that sets like the link threshold at a point where if, like for example, they're winning a risk of this, the affirmative is a call, the negative's performance is a call to coherence. Because I think there are a couple of specific examples in this debate, particularly the call to valorize debate, like in the severance standard, was a pretty clear call to coherence, particularly like you're talking about strat skews and the ability to debate in the first place, so it's just like,
okay, how does that interact with the alternative? Like, how does that framing argument of your defensive debate is consistent with the alternative in this debate? And I think you allowed the affirmative to get up there and make a bunch of spin arguments about how that is no different than the alternative. And I think in a world where there's this uniqueness argument about the necessity of certain people being coherent in certain spaces, you have to answer that specifically.
Good?
Yeah.
So for me, the decision was a lot closer to what Barlow was talking about. I think that conceding this Marriott evidence is really problematic. And I also agree that they sort of spin this card out of control. Because when I go back and look at the card, I'm not sure if I'm convinced as to whether or not the evidence is sort of giving them that ontology argument. But the issue I'm having is I don't think that the 2NR or even the block is engaging with that portion of the debate. And they then use that piece of evidence to then short circuit all of like your bro arguments throughout like the 2NR as well as, throughout the 1AR as well as the 2AR, which I think is where you all were probably closest to winning my ballot. Because I do think that the debate was really good in the sense that you all are like, what am I trying to say? So like the debate was really good in the sense that the round like comes down to like this question of intelligibility and like whether or not the affirmative is forced to produce like this question of intelligibility, and this question of like the permutation, right? Where they say that it's not just a question of, oh, is there a link, but rather are they incompatible strategies, right? Because like most of your arguments to the permutation are a question of severance and whether or not the affirmative is representing something else than what it represented in the 1AC. When they're advocating from the jump, it's like they keep the AF, and just that there are certain situations where like the affirmative would be preferable, especially when we're like reading red and black history like together in terms of how we understand and deal with these problems. The other issue I'm having is on this severance thing. I feel like you spent too much like time explaining like why you win on severance and not enough time explaining like what about the 1AC was severance, right? Like what about was in the AF and then what isn't in the AF as a result of the permutation? Because I feel like it's easy to say like the permutation is severance and then be like, oh yeah, the links prove severance, but you need to like tell me like what about those link arguments are what constitutes like the affirmative misrepresenting what it actually was in the 1AC. Because I was sort of compelled by like the severance argument because I don't think that the affirmative is answering it the greatest, and I do think that the 2AR was maybe a little bit too late to answer like the severance claim. I just think that if you're gonna go in on that kind of theory argument, it needs to be either framed better or it needs to be a larger portion of the 2NR. Because I feel like this was like a classic tried to do everything when you needed to choose maybe like one or two link arguments and then deal with like this Marriott evidence. Now, I think if you answer back like this Marriott evidence, then they're not able to then take away like your the bro arguments that you're reading. So yeah. Any questions? So what's the food? It's on the menu.
Chaz wants to go to Chick-fil-A.
Oh my god. Yeah, Chick-fil-A in New Jersey. Next.
Church's Chicken is one of the
Both of y'all got
places.
questions, huh?
Cookout.
I would be okay with Cookout, but he hates Cookout.